You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
This is gasoline.
But they didn't count on one thing.
Does he have any other relatives? Anyone else that could possibly help?
Jean-Claude Van Damme. He always makes an impact. He's trained to fight for his life. Now, he's fighting for revenge.
There's two of them. Think about it.
Van Damme. Times two.
He looks exactly like you.
Me?
Twin brothers. Reunited on a mission.
Watch my back.
To avenge their parents' death.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise. And at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Oh, you know what it is. It's still January. We got more split kicking, more nut punching, more spontaneous dancing. It's going to be great. Join the sleaze, baby. Come on.
Absolutely. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we are in our 5th year of bonus episodes. There's like 120 plus bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, which, where we talk about new release genre films. And we're just about to enter a new year. And of course, we've got lots of January horror that we are going to be talking about soon over there. So if you haven't signed up yet, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we took a little bit of a vacation there. It doesn't really seem like we do because we record a lot of stuff in advance and then just kind of leave for a bit. So we have a lot of names to go through. So I apologize for ripping through these as quickly as I'm about to. But we have Top Bass signed up for $5 a month. We had Maxwell Dean sign up. We had Ryan, Brandon Tasker signed up for $10 a month for the entire year. Getting the annual rate, as well as Doc Onehouse, who signed up for an entire year. And so if you want a little bit of a discount on the monthly rate, you can sign up for an entire year. And if you are pledging at the $10 a month, you get to join us for the monthly virtual screening, which we tend to do on the last Thursday of a given month, where Jamie and I watch a film and provide some live commentary for everybody. And because it's January, we're going to be doing something Jean-Claude related. So if you're interested, we're going to be doing something. We also had Shane Karshan sign up. We had Dillard's Department sign up at $5. We had Noah Vassar, Jacob McLean, who also got an entire year of the show right on January 1st. He knew what he wanted. We had Paul Myrick. We had Dan Monroe. We had Hannah Yager. We had Flower. We had Matthew McGuire also sign up for an entire year. A lot of people, they're getting in on the annual tier. We had Adam sign up. We had Marinus DeJagger. We had David Zimmerman. We had Jared Sparks, Jared Briones, Daniel Williams, Jared L. The 3 Jareds.
The Jareds.
They're all here. Daniel Rodriguez. We had Bobby. We had Dustin Qualls. We had another Jared Wayman. We had Jennifer. We had Elliot Chidwick. We had Niels, Levi. And that's the last one. So thanks so much to all of you folks for, new year, new patrons. Welcome. We're happy to have you and appreciate the support. That's the one plug for the week. The other plug for the week is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you are listening on either one of those platforms, and I see the stats, I look at them every week, and I see you right now listening on both those platforms. So if you are, give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners that way. And we have been getting some reviews that sometimes say, hey, they discovered the show that through the charts sometimes. So, of an episode. So if you can't sign up for the Patreon, we appreciate that as well. And what's the other plug? Oh, yeah. Sorry, it's been a while since we've done this. The very last plug is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for the show, you can get that basically put on anything that you can think of. If you want a notebook, if you want a hoodie, if you want a poster, a pillow. You guys have bought a lot of stuff with the Sleazoids logo on it. And if you're interested in that, that is at a link in the description, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. Now, this is a big time for us. We are in the thick of January, which I'm sure I'm hoping a lot of people over on the Patreon have already listened to last week's episode. But 2 weeks ago, before we jumped into that, we did what we do every time we start off a new year. We talked about the best genre movies of the year. We talked about our... Yes, and Jamie and I both went into that episode. I swear to God, I wish we even had the recordings. Jamie probably has them on his laptop somewhere. Yeah, the meetings before,
like, we're going to do this right, where it's not going to be 4 hours long. It's not going to, like, Jesus Christ.
It's not going to happen. Look, last year was 3 hours and 40, and we got to be under that this year. Like, we got serious, we straightened the collars and everything. We were like, it's going to be under 3.5 hours this year. And then we did the longest one we've ever done. Yeah, we did like 4 hours, 10 minutes. So if you want to hear us talk about our favorite genre movies of 2022 for 4 hours, including half the episode being honorable mentions, where we just essentially list out all the movies that weren't quite good enough to make the top 10. But, sometimes there's really interesting stuff in there that people didn't check out and need to check out, especially a lot of foreign genre cinema and stuff like that. So we hope some people took out their notes and got some recommendations for things that they might have missed that year. And if you haven't heard that episode, head on back. That was over on the main feed 2 weeks ago. But last week, as I already mentioned, we kicked off January because it's the 5th year of the podcast. We were thinking we got to do something a little bit special, and we realized we hadn't done kind of like a month-long series in a little while. And the last time we had a really good response to doing one was when we did Dolph Month, and we did an entire month going through the career of one Mr. Dolph Lundgren, and had a new sort of appreciation for the diversity of his action style, of his acting style, and especially his choice in filmmaker. That dude, we didn't know until we did that month, but like that dude picked genuinely interesting auteurist action filmmakers on every budget level that he worked with, and made some of the most interesting movies of his career. Like, no one knows that he did a TV movie with John Woo. Hardly anybody knows that he did that. Or Silent Trigger with Russell Mulcahy, the Australian filmmaker who did Highlander.
Yeah, that movie's style is so crazy. And then when it starts to get into the weird character stuff, like the security guard that's just off his rocker, like it's a good one. Definitely check that out. Silent Trigger again.
Yeah, so we knew that if we were going to do that again, we'd had a lot of people request it, that we had to talk about Mr. Jean-Claude Van Damme, and we started that last week exclusively over on the Patreon. We did have a lot of people sign up for it, so I'm assuming people have heard it, but anyone on the main feed who hasn't heard it yet, we talked about The Breakout last week. We talked Bloodsport and Kickboxer, which are sort of functionally the same movie, because Kickboxer came out in the heat of Bloodsport's insane box office numbers that it received.
Yeah, they're like, we need another one. Let's just do it again.
Yeah, but we had to talk about two movies where he plays a crazy ass white boy who must, through the power of his training, his belief, and his physical ability, prove that he is a better fighter than the best and the best of whatever Asian country he happens to be in at that time. And of course, it's the muscles from Brussels, man. He's always wet. He's always screaming. He's always using his feet. And we had a great time, seeing the original star power that broke through, and what people saw in his athleticism, because unlike how he separated himself from other American action stars of his era was by not just being a cool bodybuilder with a gun, but being an incredible fighter and athlete who really used his body in expressive and wordless ways, and also was
vulnerable. I think is like the biggest thing that I've taken away from him.
He could be sensitive and charming for the ladies if he wanted to be.
Exactly. and he takes a beating, which was something that we talked about a little bit in Bloodsport and Kickboxer, which I can always appreciate when, he's not just kicking ass the entire time. A lot of the time, in most of the movies I've seen, honestly, he just gets his ass kicked throughout probably most of it, and then always has that kind of redemption or whatever, that comeback.
Yeah, he's got an ego, but it's less of an ego than, you know, our
Right.
our Steven Seagals, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
For example, which we've talked about a couple times.
Yeah, and
so
his
if you haven't heard
willingness to
that,
like dance and do kind of like eccentric stuff is awesome. So
oh yeah, man, his ballet training, everything it comes into play a lot, and it's great. So if you haven't heard that episode, I'd recommend going over patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. Go over and check it out. We did a big overview on the origins of Jean-Claude Van Damme, which is good setup for this week's episode, in which we are continuing our journey through the catalog of Mr. Jean-Claude Van Damme, and I couldn't think of a more perfect guest or an actor who suits the term dadcore. So we have the host of the Dadcore Cinema Club podcast joining us this week, and probably the person I follow on Letterboxd who has seen the most Jean-Claude Van Damme films, Brandon. Brandon, how you doing?
I'm feeling good. I'm here to talk about one of my favorite people in the world.
oh yeah,
Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah, he's slowly becoming one of ours over the course. I mean, like we've already talked about like a lot of stuff of his that we like Albert Pune's Cyborg and Hard Target and Double Team, and you know, we did a lot of heavy hitters. But as with Dolph Month, we feel like, you know, going through their careers and seeing the breakout and seeing the way that they mold it and seeing some of the more maybe underseen ones, it really gives you a new appreciation for, you know, the trajectory of their careers. And as a result, you know, we talked about the breakout last week. We did Bloodsport Kickboxer. So Brandon, we're moving on this week to the 90s. So what two films are we talking about this week?
Well, I think like you guys did a great job covering like what does separate him. You covered it perfectly in that intro. Like he's this smaller guy. He's dancerly. He's beautiful for the women. And that is perfect as a summary. And I think like Bloodsport and Kickboxer are the perfect movies to look at of like what is his image. If you want to talk about Jean-Claude Van Damme, the artist, the next step is this double feature, Lionheart and Double Impact, the movies where he decides that he wants to be an actor. This is the birthplace. This is the first crawling bits where he learns to walk later in his career. Jean-Claude Van Damme growing into an actor of renown. Maybe not where he's a great actor. That comes maybe by 2008 with the JCVD, but in these films are like, we see the birth of Jean-Claude Van Damme trying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. This is where we start to see, you know, Jean-Claude, the auteurist force, like, you know, where he starts to take control of the breakthrough. He's a co-writer on both these films, and both of these films are also directed by his pal Sheldon Lettich, who he met and became friends with because Lettich wrote the screenplay for Bloodsport. So this is sort of a double feature of, we get the vision of like what he would want to do if he had the chance to write his own movies, like to mold the JCVD movie to his liking and his persona. And Brandon's right, like his choices in both of these, like again, they're flawed movies, I think, but they're both good. And part of the reason is that you get to see two different sides of what he wants to be, which is one, a huge dramatic actor. He gives himself some melodramatic monologuing in Lionheart, and in Double Impact, we get to see him be like, I don't want to be known as just the guy who can only fight in tournament settings. He's like, I'm a bigger action star than that. I can do what the Hong Kong guys are doing. I can do martial arts. I can do gunfights. I can do melodrama. I can do criminal conspiracy explosions. You know, I can do all of it, and also I can play two characters at the same time.
I can be
that's how good. Yeah.
And the fact that like the inspiration possibly came from Jeremy Irons in Dead Ringers, like this is what he looks at and he's like, I want this. Like that's a prestigious actor right there.
That's
awesome.
such an actor brain thing to do, though, to be like, that's an impressive thing that guy just did, and that is like what the ultimate pinnacle of acting is, and I want to show that I can do it too, you know? So it's very, very cool. And it would start a career-long obsession of Van Damme's about playing brothers or playing two characters in the same film. It's definitely one of the things that he became obsessed with, and Double Impact is kind of seeing the start of that. So I'm excited to get into this. Like Jean-Claude the writer Jean-Claude, the actor Jean-Claude, that I'm a diverse screen presence beyond I can kick people really good. Despite the fact that both of these films also feature him kicking people really well.
Yes,
so
it has to.
Of course. But that being said, I think we are going to jump right into it here. Let's start things off with Lionheart.
The stakes are high.
What I did tonight, I did for my family.
You win. You live. Now what's it gonna be? You lose. You die.
It's going to be simple.
Van Damme is Lionheart.
All right, we are talking Lionheart. And Jamie, you're going to love this. We got many AKAs today. And it's funny, it usually happens with Italian movies. So it's so bizarre sometimes to see it happen with something, but of this caliber. But we have many different alternate titles for this. We have AKA AWOL, Absent Without Leave, AKA Wrong Bet, which apparently was the Australian title. Our friend Andrew Law from the Bunta Vista Socialist Club mentioned that to me. And also the last title, the title that was on the copy I watched, which I believe is sort of like the longer cut, like the director's cut, Leon, or is it Lion? I really can't tell because so many people spell it differently. So many people pronounce it differently
I think it's
in the movie.
French name.
It's Leon. Okay.
French, Leon.
Yeah.
So you watched the director's cut?
I think that I did. I watched the one that
too.
has the title credit Leon. And,
Did it keep
also,
switching to like SD footage throughout?
And it has some SD footage in it. Yeah.
I've never actually seen that version.
I mean, most of it we'll get into some of it, but like I'd argue that for most of it, it's just kind of slightly elongating certain moments. Like some of the dramatic stuff, especially like there's an extra scene, or not an extra scene, but like that scene where he like crawls off the boat and into New York City and just kind of looks at the class disparity that he sees in New York. That scene has just like more shots of him like observing things and like walking through the dirty streets and like, like it feels more like scene extensions than like entirely scenes cut out.
I'm curious if I saw that version then, because I watched the one on Prime Video, so whatever version they had, it might be slightly different. But yeah, I do see here too that
we will find out as we read through each other's notes, and someone's like, I didn't see that happen.
Yeah, I do see that they have like, it says there's a closest version available in an Australian release. I guess that was the Wrong Bet title. That has more like violence and stuff, but I don't know. It seems like some of these versions might be lost a little bit.
Yeah, but this is a 1990 American martial arts drama film. I'm going to highlight that. Co-written and directed by Sheldon Lettich, and co-written and starring, of course, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jean-Claude Van Damme. And yeah, as we mentioned, like last week, we already covered it. We talked about the origins. We talked about his era as a child prodigy in karate and kickboxing and ballet, and his early era doing extra work for Canon Films, befriending Chuck Norris, getting into stunt performing. I do love that one of the very first things he ever did was being an extra in a Canon film, but not as a stunt performer, but as a breakdancing performer in their musical film Breakin'. That's just a sick like kind of origin story for him.
That's awesome.
He got into Canon Films, but not through the action first, through the dancing, and that just kind of speaks to his uniqueness and his charm.
Yeah, is it Kickboxer where he does his first dance on screen? Like at least in as the star.
It is the one where he goes drunken master mode and does a full-on dance fight scene where he shakes his ass like a legend and also kicks everyone's ass at the same time.
That's the star-making dance right there in that movie.
Absolutely, it is. That sets him apart. Like, I think we discussed that. It sets him apart so much from every other action star when you see that. It's like, who else was going to do that? Only he would do that. So it's just... No,
like the only other person I could conceive of doing something like that when we talked about it was like Jackie Chan. And Jackie Chan...
But it'd be more humorous, we said, right.
Yeah, like it wouldn't be as like genuinely sexy and sweaty in the way that he tries to make it, Like he's not showing off how big of a cake he's got while he, Jackie would, he'd throw in some hijinks in there, where Jean-Claude, he's very pretty, he's very charming, and acrobatic, and yeah, so like that definitely is a really good place to start with him, because in the early scenes, or in the early films where we were talking about him, like it was very clearly they saw this guy who could really fight, and they were like, well, what if we just we don't need to hire an actor, let's just hire a guy who fights, like especially with Bloodsport. They were like, we want to do an Enter the Dragon international fighting team martial art movie, but we need a guy who kind of looks the part, but we can afford him.
Right. Yeah.
And we just have a guy write the screenplay who is as much of a real life egomaniac and compulsive liar as like Steven Seagal is in Frank Dukes.
Hell yeah.
And then you just, you throw in some Top Gun era, like romantic 80s pop ballads. You throw in some.
They were one of the great bromances of the 80s as well.
Yes.
Of course.
Definitely.
Of course.
Them looking at each other at the end and saying they love each other, but he doesn't say it to the girl that he fell in love with. It's great.
Like, real quick, my favorite part of Bloodsport is when his friend gets his first win and he looks up in the crowd and points to JCVD, like when you're excited to show your new toy to your friend at recess.
Yeah. You're like, look what I got, man. Look what I did.
Yeah, and the only real downfall of those films is the fact that they really aren't directed on the same caliber that, Jean-Claude is able to achieve as a performer. Like if he had worked with, as we'll talk about later, like with a Hong Kong filmmaker, someone who could really shoot martial arts sequences to the effect that they're looking for, rather than kind of shooting them like American sports movies where there's like lots of second unit crowd reaction shots of people just cheering, and then you cut back and there's a reverse shot of one guy punching another guy in the face, and I'm like, this guy can do some. We've seen this man leap over people while doing the splits and flipping and hitting them in the nuts in like a swift motion. I'm like, you need to get some more kinetic filmmaking in there with him. And while I won't say that Lionheart and Double Impact necessarily are a huge, I don't know what to say here, like a huge improvement. They are
I'd say maybe. There's less fighting, but I'm trying to. I don't know, because I guess they have like a lot of the cool slow-mo stuff, and at least in the final fight of Bloodsport is kind of entertaining and pretty good. But
there's definitely an improvement, I'll say, in Lionheart specifically in the dramatics.
Yes,
in Van Damme as someone who can read his lines and is actually given a character, and I think that was like the main thing that happened here when he met Sheldon Lettich and struck up a personal friendship with him, because Van Damme, as we talked about, just he left his home country and he moved to L.A. and Sheldon Lettich was an L.A. boy and a Vietnam vet who, when he got back from serving as a radio operator, chose to pursue photography and eventually screenwriting. And I think he started out actually just writing like war films. He did a war film with Bruce Campbell called Thou Shall Not Kill. He did another one, apparently that's the debut of Joaquin Phoenix, called Ruskies. And he eventually co-wrote Rambo 3 with Stallone. So that was kind of like his main field. But because he wrote the script for Bloodsport, he had a huge career divergence where Van Damme liked working with him so much, and he backed him, and he was like, dude, if you co-write these movies with me, because you're an actual screenwriter and I am not actually sure exactly how to get started in that department, I will back you and get you into the director's seat for the next things that I star in. And that's how both of these movies kind of came to be. And both of these got released by major studios. So this was like a huge shot for both of these guys to be like, I can prove myself as a director, I can prove myself as an actor. And that was the goal. That,
and they made money,
Lettich,
I think, too. So
yeah, and so, but especially to Lettich, his main thing was, give me dialogue, give me character development.
Yeah.
There's a quote from an interview of Lettich here where he was just like, he's gonna be more than the karate guy. He's not just gonna do kicks and one-liners in low budget tournament movies. He's a star, and we can prove it. And so that's how they crafted this story, which is loosely about Van Damme playing this guy named Leon Gaultier, a deserter in the French Foreign Legion, one of the first many awesome backstory excuses for his accent that we will see over the coming month, including regularly just being French Canadian, because they were like, well, he's kind of American looking, but he's got the accent, so
And the word French is in the name.
Yes. And essentially, he has to fight his way back to New York and eventually L.A. Via these underground street fighting circuits to raise money for his brother's wife and niece after his brother is severely injured and killed in a drug deal gone wrong. Which I will say, watching this for the first time, because I actually hadn't seen this one yet.
Yeah.
I was shocked at the level of, because this is I'm pretty sure, I don't know if I watched the uncut version or not, because I watched some sort of longer one, and some of the SD footage that was included was a little bit of violence. Like there was more of him running around on fire.
Oh, yeah.
And there were longer shots of like his charred face and stuff like that. And I was pretty like, God damn, that's pretty nasty stuff.
I'll say it's really brutal in the theatrical as it is. It's like it's a drug deal. He touches the cocaine. He's like, this is sugar. And the guy's like, this is gasoline. Pours gasoline and lights him on fire. And his charred body lying on the ground is there in the theatrical. It's gross.
Yeah. And they even show like they have him running around and hitting a wall with like the camera kind of doing like a bird's eye view almost. And then when they cut to the hospital, you really do see like his bubbling skin and like all the burns and all of that. So it is pretty violent. I also really like actually the how moody it is right away. Like it's got this kind of very low and ominous score, but then it has a bunch of like ripping reverb saxophone, I believe.
The score is actually kind of unreal for this movie in general, I thought.
Totally.
That saxophone is incredible.
Yeah, it was really, it's very moody and it gets you right into that, and the camera's panning down and swooping under a bridge for a drug deal and stuff. It's just got that like street crime vibe. It's very cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and it's the dude who did the music for Wake and Fright who's the one doing this. So
nice.
it does have that kind of level of mood to it, and it does throw in for Van Damme, who, as we mentioned in both Bloodsport and Kickboxer, they were tied into these sort of pop soundtracks, these very huge, very broad sounds that were popular, that they wanted people to kind of associate with the film. And Van Damme was like, no, we're gonna give me some big like melodramatic or orchestra. I wanna really accentuate the feelings of my characters. And so there's some choices being made here by Lettich and Van Damme that definitely improve the film and add a little bit more of like some of the mood and atmosphere we kind of felt were missing from the previous films, at least in a dramatic sense. Like they definitely had their own kind of mood that of the 80s action movie in that kind of way.
Yeah, like they did have that scene with Jean-Claude kind of walking, and it almost seems dreamlike or nightmare-like, where he's being introduced to the guy in Kickboxer, and he's hitting the cement pole in the middle of the room.
Yes.
And it's got like the reverb and the sound effects and all of that. Kind of seems a little bit dreamlike. So yeah, there are elements, but I found this one to just be consistently like that a lot of the time.
Well, I think it's immediately striking if you compare like the chase scenes in these two movies, Bloodsport and this one. Like Bloodsport both movies have government agents that are trying to get Jean-Claude back to the army. Mm-hmm. And in Bloodsport, the chase scene is like upbeat and silly.
Yeah.
And it's a hangout movie, so that like scene is very light and fun.
Jean-Claude is smiling the whole time, actually. Yeah.
He's having the time of his life. Because there's like he doesn't really have any stakes in Bloodsport. He's not fighting. He's not really fighting for revenge. He just wants to fight. It's like he's a guy on vacation having fun. And then in this movie, in Lionheart, when he gets chased by the agents, it's life or death. If he gets caught, he can't provide for his family. And he is intense, just like the difference in his facial expression. He is intense the entire time. That is a dramatic scene. Whereas in Bloodsport, it's like a fun set piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important distinction, because like what's interesting is Van Damme is, once again, the intent was to separate himself from the idea that he could just be like a guy who looks good and says one-liners in a movie about a martial arts tournament. And what's kind of funny about this movie is that they do copy so many of the beats that they were already familiar with. Like he is just repurposing him going AWOL like he does in Bloodsport and getting chased by people. He does end up in these, not quite necessarily as much of a stage tournament, but like an underground fighting ring.
He has a brother in trouble, as he loves to have in his movies.
Yeah.
And he's
so
going from
what's
fight to fight, and you get like each. What's cool with this one too is like you kind of have the same stage for every fight, and what you were watching was the fighters themselves. Whereas this one, it seems like he's fighting in a pool, he's fighting in a rich elite party, he's fighting under a bridge. Like there's just so many.
A circle of
locations.
Cars, which is my favorite setting.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Just fighting in the headlights of like a dozen cars that have been encircled. It is the Street Fighter movie. Like this is the better Street Fighter adaptation. He's going from location to location, different fighting stages with different caricatures of fighters he's going against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Definitely. Well, and what's interesting is just again that he's found a way to do the things that he's already kind of familiar with doing in movies, but turning them, as Brandon kind of put it, like into actual drama, like actual like the writing is not the most heart-wrenching or specific writing you've ever seen in a character drama or anything. It is dealing a lot in archetypes and a little bit of stereotypes as well, but it is his attempt at something closer to how do I make my kind of street fighting movie that I want to make into something that's more resembles one of those like old school like boxing class melodramas almost. He's got to fight for his family.
Times.
Yeah, the Walter Hill, right?
Hard Times, yeah.
Yeah. He's got to fight for his family. He's got to fight for money, and not only that, he needs to also bear witness to the class disparity of how all the elite sort of citizens who organize this violence for sport versus the people who he sees like some of his family members and people who are kind of on the lower rungs of the fighting tournament who just aren't making it by. And it's very simple and old fashioned stuff, but it is dramatically coherent in a way that like we were talking about like the romance and Bloodsport. We were like, we don't know what's going on. They're just doing things. There's kind of like a beats that you would imagine make sense in another movie, but like the chemistry's not quite there. And this is like he really wants to actually hammer home the dramatics of this stuff. And honestly, he's pretty successful at it. Yeah,
they do. Like one of the first moments that really spoke to me, just that he's really trying here, and he does a good job. I think it's when he finds out about his brother, and he passes away, and they have this big close up, and he's actually got like tears running down his face, and I believe he actually did it. It looks like he's genuinely crying. Mm-hmm. So that's just interesting to look at, and I also love that within the family drama stuff, he doesn't come off as the hero right away whatsoever. So he just has more time to like have those sad scenes where he's watching the niece and like wishing that he could connect with her and the mother again. And then like, him walking around being sad about it, but then he stumbles upon a homeless mother and daughter and like gives her back the ball that she's lost and all of that kind of stuff. I just, I love how he really digs into that the entire film. And it's just that thing that he does a lot of the time. It's that kind of redemption story or underdog kind of story. Mm-hmm. Not just with the fighting, but with the family stuff too.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this gets kickstarted because like we watch his brother do the sketchy drug deal under this LA freeway, and he just gets lit on fire and charred, and just the dude is like he's running and falling and crawling on fire. It's actually a pretty crazy stunt to just start the movie with, honestly, just a little bit too, let alone just like a sort of a moody sequence, and that scene ends with him screaming for his brother. He's like, Leon! And all of a sudden we are in Djibouti. Hard cut to Van Damme doing hard labor in the desert and wondering why the information that his sister-in-law has been trying to reach him, Helen, hasn't been getting to him. He's like, my brother is hurt. I need to leave. And of course, he's got all these military bureaucrat hard asses being like, you can't, you owe us your time. You owe us your body. You owe us these things. And of course he's not going to listen to that, man. He's going to break out of there with the power of his legs. And
yes. Yeah, he
stabs a guy in the dick, which is like I think like a real like setting of this is a little bit of maybe a tougher Jean-Claude.
A little bit. He's adding a little bit of action beats to his repertoire that he doesn't have, because you get the windmill kicks, you get a little bit of the roundhousing going on, and I do think a little bit of the cutting here is a little awkward. I do think Lettich is not the best director of martial arts action, which will be funny when we talk about Double Impact, because I actually think he's a better kind of shootout filmmaker than he is like
when
like
he's
a
ripping
fighter.
off John Woo.
Yeah,
Totally. Yeah,
pulls it off a little bit more. But there's still some real solid impacts here, and some of the added violence, like for example, like pinning a dude's hand to the wall with a knife, or like throwing an elbow while he's driving a Jeep through a fence. Like even just having him doing car stunts and stuff. Like he's definitely trying to upgrade some of the action.
Yeah,
they're making a bigger movie, like right off the bat, from that man on fire little stunt to this like little action sequence in Djibouti. They're making a statement with this movie of like, we're not just making a small tournament movie. This is our serious movie with real stakes, and we're going to show you more of what Jean-Claude can do. Because there's also like more boxing in this movie than there is foot stuff. He definitely kicks guys, but there's a lot more of Jean-Claude punching guys in this movie.
That's true.
Yeah. I also love the way that he's introduced. So you get the fire sequence, but then when they cut back to him before they actually arrive at his location, they go back and forth between the Jeep arriving and his like biceps, like just close-ups of him using a sledgehammer, and his chest just bulging in the sun and all of that. So I love
much his movies leer at him is one of the best qualities of his movies for everyone.
Yeah,
especially this is the first time he showed his like. So they show his nude butt in this movie, and it's the first time they did that in his career, and it was his idea, by the way.
Yes.
They filmed the scene with the robe on. After they're done filming, he goes to Lettich and says, "Can we do another take with the robe off?" Lettich just like, "I guess we'll figure it out in the editing room," and like that becomes a signature of his career. If you read an interview with Lettich, he mentions that it was a signature because both the women and the gay guys were into it. Like Lettich and JCVD were very aware of what he had going on and what they needed to show off to the audiences to sell their movies.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
sick.
It's awesome. It's awesome. I love that it's Van Damme that came up with the idea. Like, I guess in Bloodsport you have the one sequence where he's putting on the Speedo, but it's not quite a robe drop. He's not going full throttle with it yet.
There's a great like making of doc where they ask Deborah Renard about that story, and she goes, "Well, he does have a good butt." Like that was her reaction. She's like, "He's right. He knows what he has, and he's right."
I've always found it interesting too that most martial arts movies, unless someone is in like a dire situation where they have to do it, they don't do a lot of nut punching. And Jean-Claude Van Damme has had it in all 4 movies so far. And I'm pretty sure it's kind of like something that he uses throughout the filmography. And I've always just found that fascinating because I've always been to the understanding that that's like the dirty move in fighting, but he doesn't give a shit. He split kicks and goes wha-bam. Doesn't matter.
They make it work by making him like the underdog and everything. Yes. So he's getting his shit kicked in, and then it comes across in a way of like a moment of desperation. So he's not quite like Johnny Cage who breaks it out because he sucks at fighting.
Right. Oh my god, yeah.
Yeah, but the way that Van Damme just he understands his image, he understands his appeal to women especially, and he also has a little bit of a homoerotic bent to him that he was completely comfortable with in a way that some of the other performers of his era maybe sometimes weren't. Some of them were, some of them knew as well, but Van Damme really knew, and even in the movies that he wrote, he was like, no, we're gonna add more. We're gonna get I'm gonna be wet and shirtless while working the engine room of the steamboat that's going to be taking me from Djibouti to New York.
Just wait till we get to Double Impact. We don't have to get into it now, obviously, but it gets like incredibly sexual the entire time.
Well, in this one, I'm thinking like when he finally does come across the underground like street fighting ring in New York, where the funky jazz music kind of starts kicking in a little bit, and you get these there's a little bit more of an energy to some of the filmmaking too. There is like this crazy 360-degree like spinning camera maneuver at all of the people shouting, watching him win his first fight and kind of win the first bit of money, and linking him up with the fight organizer Joshua, played by Harrison Page in the film, who eventually takes him. He's awesome, and eventually takes him to Brian Thompson from Terminator and Cobra, who then, it's kind of like there's a whole web of people who takes him to Cynthia, who's the one who finally dubs him Lionheart, because he is as strong as a lion, but he has a big heart that makes him too trusting.
Right. He gets the Spider-Man treatment, right? He's like, my name's Leon, and they're like, no, you're Lionheart.
You're Lionheart.
Yeah. Exactly, and it's that first scene where he's finally, he upgrades from street fighting for entertainment to doing it for the wealthier elite in like a parking garage. So that's like the first upgrade. It's just the venue upgrade. Like just no longer.
Some of the details in that fight too, like for the most part, the fighting itself, it has its moments. Like it's got a lot of just precise fighters. Like you have Van Damme, obviously, and his opponents are very good. But stuff that accented for me was when there's one part where blood like squirts out of somebody's mouth and gets on one of the like rich lady's dresses and face, and then she seems shocked at first, but then just starts like giving into it and cheering again. And I was,
she licks it
on her. Yeah, she licks it off her finger.
Right.
Yeah, which is even crazier. Yeah.
while locking eyes with Jean-Claude the entire time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So like that part has a little bit of, like clearly the wealthy are into this because of, for sadistic purposes almost in a way.
Yeah.
And you're watching these poorer people kind of beat the shit out of each other. But also, and what I wanted to point out too about the sort of homoerotic bent too, the first guy he fights gets like a straight up Roadhouse line delivered to him.
Right.
Which is, I don't know if I want to fight you or fuck you. Like that's how pretty Jean-Claude is. Like
and
that's what the first opponent.
Jean-Claude wrote that is very fun.
Yes.
I have to feel like that was his specific line. He's like, this is what I want him to say when he approaches me.
Well, and even that guy, when he's fighting the guy before Jean-Claude, he's taunting his opponent by being like, let's do lunch sometime.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe that guy's actually gay. Maybe it's just representation.
It's true. Well, and do you know what? Good for Jean-Claude, man. There is a huge diversity of fighters that take place in here, including a Scottish guy who just fights really dirty, which maybe that's not the best representation.
That's my favorite of him, because that is the most like, this is a Street Fighter character in the movie.
Yeah. He's ridiculous.
Oh yeah, it's just a character. Yeah, it's a complete like cartoon, which is amazing. And I love we were already kind of discussing it, but the style of that fight is great because it's all the headlights of the cars that are surrounding it, and that's what makes the ring itself, like it's the circle. And then they start using the cars and slamming people into windshields and all of that. And even when it ends, it's got this really great camera move where the camera is actually in the back seat as he's taunting two of the like head guards or whatever, holding up the Scottish guy. And he just kind of like looks at them and then lets him go, and he hits his head off the hood and falls down onto the floor. It's
he chokes the Scottish guy with a car antenna.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, like there's a lot of great style in this sequence. I really enjoy it.
The staging's incredible in all the different fight sequences. They all have in completely unique settings that they use fully.
Yeah. Yep. Totally. Yeah, and like what are some of the? Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, I also really appreciate, just because like we're talking about a little bit of a diversity of location, but that only happens too because this film is a little bit longer than the other films that we've previously talked about with Jean-Claude. Like the version I watched especially was like I want to say it was like an hour 50, the version that I watched. So it is a little bit shaggier. And I do think that some of the fighting can be shot and cut in a little way that kind of dulls some of the physical prowess of it. But again, it's given some visual detail and location and choreography and personality to it. And again, it's populated with like a little bit of feeling. Like I actually liked spending the time kind of just hanging out with Jean-Claude and like doing the little things that he's doing around the cities because of the shaggier structure of it. It actually takes him like nearly half the movie to get to LA. Like the opening scene is his brother being murdered in LA, and you immediately go, well, the next scene is he flies to LA and he goes and kicks all those people's asses. Like that's just obviously what you would do. But no, Jean-Claude, he's a little bit of a woke king. So he gets to New York, and the first thing that he does is one of my new favorite scenes in any Jean-Claude movie, which is that he jumps off of the steamboat where he's being taken advantage of, because he's now being treated as like a member of the underclass, who's someone who, they're like, well, we're gonna basically put you into, we're gonna enslave you essentially because you need our help to get to Los Angeles. And he's like, no, I'm gonna kick your ass and then jump off your boat and swim the rest of the way to New York, which he does do. And then he arrives in New York, and you get this amazing scene where he is just, and Jean-Claude wrote this scene, it is just him observing the poverty on the streets of New York. And it's literally just Jean-Claude dripped out, wet as hell. He just swam from Djibouti to New York, not quite that far, but pretty far. And he is just observing all of these issues that he's seeing, and then he looks up. He literally goes from like looking at these poor people living in destitute on the street, and then he looks up at a tall skyscraper, and the camera follows his gaze while he makes that look, and then he just shakes his head into himself. He just goes, America. And the music swells, the orchestra builds up, and it's completely genuine. He is just like, America, there is something wrong with this place, and I'm gonna kick my way through it, and we're gonna kick my way into the elites, and I'm gonna fuck them up.
Yeah, and just stumble. Like,
it's an elevated action movie, Yeah, that's what we're calling it.
We're coining it here. That's awesome. And I just love it. Immediately after that, he finds like the street fight under the bridge, and that whole story begins. He's just like, oh, sweet, I found my calling in New York right away. That's perfect.
Yeah, and then he's already punching dudes in the cock, and but he has that's just it, is he has motivation. He's like, there's something sad and unjust and dark that now fuels these bodily actions that I'm about to take.
He's not punches.
And you know what? Again, it's so simple, but it does have a little bit of like power to it, especially in comparison to some of the lazier sort of writing we've seen him have to do, where they just don't even put that work in at all. And as much as you do feel a little bit of Van Damme's ego being like, I'm going to punch my way through America's poverty problem, it's beautiful that he thinks that he's going to do that and he's going to solve that.
There's another element of that in the story where the French Foreign Legion, like, they want him back because he deserted, and someone their leading officer says something like, maybe the LAPD will find him when they're done arresting drug dealers. There's this idea that like the cops could arrest him, but they're too busy arresting poor people. And there's a scene about halfway through the movie where he's watching his family from afar because they don't want anything to do with him. And he's like behind a tree, and he's 2 feet away from 2 LAPD officers that are arresting a group of teens. So it's like, oh, look, in America, the cops are too busy just arresting teenagers to deal with another problem. Yeah. And it's as like ham-fisted a visual as you can get, but it's extremely funny to me.
For sure.
I also do like some of the dramatic, like I was talking about the part where he's walking around because he's kind of sad that his niece and the mother won't allow him to see the niece. And he stumbles
because
upon
they blame
homeless.
him for getting his brother Francois like into the drug trade, essentially, even though it's implied that by doing that they mean that he took the rap for his brother getting involved in drugs, and then they go, well, then you should have just let him go to jail and be rehabilitated rather than let him just continue doing on what he was doing and having to fend for himself essentially in the streets, in which we do get an incredible Jean-Claude line delivery. He was not enough strong to be jail.
Yeah.
And it is, and I will say, it's kind of moving. It's silly, but it's kind of moving.
Like,
what makes lines like that work is, as much as Jean-Claude is in these early movies like struggling with English, what makes those line deliveries work for me and makes them so endearing is that you can tell he's trying. Like, he's never phoned in a performance. I've seen 45 Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. I've maybe seen 1 or 2 performances where I felt like it was kind of phoned in. He is trying in every movie he's ever done, no matter the size and no matter like what the subject matter is. He's always putting everything he can. And you can tell that he genuinely wants to be the best actor he can be in any given scene and any given line delivery. And that passion comes through. So like, I believe the emotion of of lines like that, even if sometimes the delivery is silly.
Yeah. And just the confidence to go for them. Like, he could have easily just done one stupid little action movie after the other, but for him to make the conscious choice, this is his, I guess, kind of like third movie that's really a feature for him. And this is when he decides to make the change. And he seems like he has, I can't remember if it was in the Lionheart or the Double Impact notes that I was looking at, but he seems to be completely aware of this. Like, he's like, people will stop watching me if I just do the same thing over and over again. So he's also like a very intelligent person and very calculated and self-aware of what he's doing. And that is something that definitely elevates him.
You can see that he wants to entertain and improve as an artist.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all on screen.
To compare to a guy today, I think he's a lot like Dave Bautista in that way. Where like Dave Bautista is, I think people recognize him as a good actor now.
Yeah.
But he wasn't always, and he got there by pushing himself constantly. That was Jean-Claude Van Damme. From early on, just pushing himself to always be a better actor. And by his like 40s and 50s, he got there. But when you look back, you can see him trying here in his like 20s.
Yeah.
When that journey starts.
Yeah, and that's what's sort of what interesting is that you can tell how badly they want this to be like a legitimate drama, and it is a significant in terms of writing improvement over the dramatics of Bloodsport and Kickboxer, and as a result, they do sacrifice some kind of the lean action qualities of those films in order to pull them off. Like, there's lots of scenes here of him walking around America and seeing injustice and feeling sad, and even just the fact that a good half of this movie is him being like, well, my brother was murdered, and the only thing that came of it is that I was taken advantage of on a boat and had to start doing street fighting to make money to make my way to Los Angeles. And by the time he made it, his brother basically had just died. So it's just like there's so much horrible things happening, and the next step of it is, well, also your brother's family is now in like crippling medical debt.
Yeah.
And this is actually one of the few movies where he doesn't want to fight is kind of the idea too, where like in the other ones he's kind of eagerly training and signing up and trying to get involved, trying to prove himself. In this, he's like,
for the most part too,
he's like, the fighting is like an ugly thing that I do to make money for like a good reason, essentially. And that's the only reason why when he gets to LA and he decides to keep fighting. But when he does that one fight in New York, he's like, that's enough money for me to get to LA. I'm good. That's it. I'm out.
Yeah, there's multiple scenes where he's just telling them repetitively that he's just kind of like, no, I'm doing this for my family. I'm not doing this for you. Like, as soon as I get the money, I'm out. That whole thing. And so, yeah, he's definitely a more like endearing character than like,
even though he acknowledges the temptations, because there is the lady Cynthia in her Los Angeles condo where she strips for him and wears her lingerie, and I do love that when he wakes up, he's naked in bed because she stripped him down while he was asleep, and then she's just in front of him in the room just like working out, like she's trying to pull like one of his moves on him.
Yeah,
where she's just like, oh, do you see my tight workout clothes there, Jean-Claude?
Well, I'm doing back rows. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, which is the butt shot scene in the robe, and he even gets his, I'm not your play toy. You can't just buy me and buy sex from me, woman.
But then I like that he plays back just to taunt her because he knows just how sexy he really is. It's great stuff.
Of course.
Yeah. He puts on the robe just to take it off again.
Yeah. Yes. Right, exactly. Like, that's what a brilliant move. That's hilarious. Oh, that's a power
so
move.
It's so funny that you'll have a scene like that, and then you'll get like those moments like what Brandon was talking about, like the cool little crane shot of the Legionnaires tailing him and Helen, and the Legionnaires looking for him, and observing all of this sort of like financial trouble that not just his family is in, but other people are in as well, and it's just eventually he starts making the money in LA, and starts sending it to his brother's wife, or his sister-in-law, essentially, via Joshua, the Harrison Page character, who is pretending to be like an insurance policy guy for the late husband. And eventually, of course, he has to win his way back into their lives and get referred to as the niece by not a stranger, which I do think is like a funny little writerly, like it's a very cute little writerly gesture that like a first-time writer would come up with, which is like, the little girl, my mom said not to talk to strangers. Is this guy a stranger? And she's like, well, yes, he is, because I hate him. And then it's like, over the course of the film, he's not a stranger. He's your uncle, and he's awesome, and we love him.
Love can blossom. Yeah.
That's right.
So while we're mentioning like the Harrison Page character, one thing about him is like he's just incredible in the movie. And there's an interview with Sheldon Lettich where he talks about why he hired him and his thought process in casting his films with Jean-Claude and what set it apart. He describes the earlier films, Kickboxer and Bloodsport, as having like he called it the canon mindset, which is that they believe that if they just had Jean-Claude in fights, that's all they needed to get audiences. They didn't need anything more. They didn't have to surround him with great actors. Lettich's idea was that Jean-Claude is a competitive guy, and if you put someone in the scene with him who is going to outact him, you won't show him up. You will, in fact, just push him to try even harder and to become a better actor himself. That was his mindset in directing Jean-Claude and knowing him as a friend and knowing that's who he was to surround him with actors like Harrison Page in this movie or Jeffrey Lewis in the movie we'll talk about next.
Yes.
Who will push him to become even better in every scene that he has to share with them.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's true. It worked. Jean-Claude, he's putting the work in.
Yeah, they did seem to have an understanding with each other that worked really well. Is this the last, was Double Impact the last time that they worked together?
No, they did some later stuff into the 2000s, I believe. Brandon's probably seen them.
Sweet.
I've seen them all. They did The Quest, which is their take on The Quest was that's Jean-Claude Van Damme's directorial debut, with Sheldon Lettich helped write. The Order is what I meant to say. I always the blank. They're kind of the same title. The Order is their take on an Indiana Jones movie. It takes place in Jerusalem about a secret religious sect and conspiracy.
Oh, cool.
That's like Charlton Heston's last movie in the U.S. Just interesting fact. He plays Jean-Claude's dad in it. They also made Hardcore together, which is sadly one of the worst movies I've ever seen. So you can skip that one. Came out in 2006. But the Order is pretty fun. Sheldon Lettich also helped write Legionnaire, which is another movie where Jean-Claude's a legionnaire, except this time he's in Morocco, and there's an uprising against the French colonizers there, and it's kind of almost his sort of serious war movie, maybe a bit of his Lawrence of Arabia.
Okay.
Not as good, to be clear, but it's definitely him going for a serious and nuanced war movie. So yeah, they've worked together a few times, both with Sheldon Lettich helping do script polish on movies that he didn't direct, and also him directing Jean-Claude a half dozen times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you feel this is his strongest with Sheldon?
Lionheart?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think Lionheart and Double Impact are their two strongest they've done together.
Cool. Just curious, because I wasn't sure if I saw any of their other later ones. I've seen a few Van Dammes, but
I would recommend The Order. I think that's a fun movie. Cool. It's a middling, but it's a fun, goofy Indiana Jones thing. There's the opening set pieces is Jean-Claude trying to steal a Fabergé egg from a museum, and it features him having to juggle it in the air in between doing kicks on security guards that are trying to stop him.
Oh, nice. That sounds great.
Which is very silly and very fun.
Yeah, I do like that later in his career he would diversify. We'll talk about it a little bit, even with just Double Impact, but he would diversify the kinds of fighting that he was willing to do, because this movie is a lot of...
It's very funny.
It is,
Double Impact has humor in it, which we'll get to.
Yeah, but this is a lot of, he is still doing it's better than a lot of the tournament fighting, which did become a little bit samey in both the movies we talked about last week, where they would just kind of they would literally just do a montage of 10 different fights and you couldn't tell them together. And we've already talked about with this, he'll, be fighting a Scottish dude who is shirtless except for his kilt in a sea of car headlights forming a ring around them. That is just inherently a better piece of visualization of fighting, and having him be thrown through a windshield or strangle a guy with an antenna, or at one point he just punches his fist through the driver's side window of a car and knocks
He kicks a guy through the glass wall at a handball court or something.
Yeah, it's like a squash court, I'm pretty sure, which is sick. And in that case, he's actually fighting like a wrestler type fighter too. So he has to like change his style. And it is funny when he kicks them through the glass, and you just get all the bloodthirsty rich dudes with like holding money with bets, and they're like, yeah, like push him through. And then, you know, cut to him jogging in LA and watching his niece like ride her new bike that she can now afford because of, you know, the fighting that he's doing. And then doing his fit changes too, where he goes from like the jeans and boots that he fights in one scene to like the full on like gym spandex that he has while he's, you know, fighting a legit like martial artist in that shallow swimming pool, which is clearly there for the sole purpose of the shots, where he kicks his opponent into the water and his opponent can just whip his long hair out like a beautiful like 80s woman in a music video. You know, that's clearly why that location was chosen. But again, the guy just surrounded by rich people screaming at them.
It is really funny too to watch like that party and just to have everybody there in their bathing suits like cheering surrounding an empty pool as people just kick their asses in it. It's just such a strange looking scene, but very entertaining.
Yeah, but he eventually makes his way up the ring, making all of this money for his family, but he's also making a couple enemies on the way, you know, because the French Legionnaire are still after him, and Cynthia is getting a little bit annoyed because she has brought this guy in, she has, you know, risen him to prominence in this fighting circuit, but he doesn't want to sleep with her. And she thinks that he actually wants to sleep with his sister-in-law and is not just supporting her financially because it's the moral thing to do in that situation. So she actually organizes a way to basically take him down and bet against him at the same time by setting up of course, you got to have in the Jean-Claude movie, you know, a big bad guy by the name of Attila in this film, who is a guy who they show tapes of. He's just a huge man. He's
Yeah.
Yeah,
and he just takes punches. Like his whole fighting style is just to get punched in the face and then eventually attack. It's
he just gets punched in the face 20 times and is like, you know, I can take it, and then gets the opponent's confidence up and then just like breaks your spine. That's his whole deal.
I love her gambit with him where she watches the tape and then she edits it herself, then cuts off the part where Attila wins, so she can get people to like bet against Attila by thinking he's weak and just takes a bunch of punches.
Yeah.
And the French Legionnaires show up and they're like, look, we will give him back to you once he loses this fight. And the French Legion are just like, can we watch? We'd like to show up and hang out at that fight. And he arrives at the house for the big fight. To the one instance of a big soft rock pop ballad playing, No Mercy.
No Mercy, backs to the wall, no mercy, it's winner takes all.
That's right.
Oh, hell yeah. And
That's
I love
that
some
classic Jean-Claude.
That Jean-Claude bets on himself, baby. And there's dialogue to say that. He's like, I took all of my money and I bet on myself. And it's just like it's just such a, I mean, it's, you know, it's a cliche, but it's his, I love his confidence and his just like his spirit.
Yeah, the only thing that's like a little bit disorienting about this fight, because there is some cool stuff that they throw in here where they repeat certain blows that he does so that you'll get the impact of it. It's kind of like the Jackie Chan thing where he was a kind of like show people like hitting twice or even hitting a third time and make sure they see it every time to make it all seem like it's one big hit. Unfortunately, I think that's what they're trying to do, and in this they end up doing it like 8 times and it doesn't seem like one big hit. It just seems like they're
same,
you know, kind of like jump cutting into a fight scene or something.
Sure, yeah.
So doing so many like reverse shot hits on every impact that they do in this is a little bit much, but it does have some decent like sports movie drama to it where he's like, you know, he's coming in with the broken ribs from the chase scene with the Legionnaire.
He's not looking confident like he normally is, that kind of thing.
What? And Attila immediately takes advantage of it. Like there's some drama and decision making by the fighters to be like, oh, I see that he's weak there, I'm going to punch him there. And he's fighting, in this case, he's fighting a dude so big, you know, that he can't, you know, he can't just bring him down the usual way that he takes a guy down. Like this guy is like slapping Van Damme's like fists and just like hitting them back. Like he's just, it's crazy the things that he is doing. And there's actually
too big.
There's one part where that made me laugh, where Attila is just punching him in the thighs over and over again. I was like, dude, this guy knows.
Out those legs. Yeah, he knows exactly what the weapons are.
We always say this every time we talk about a Jean-Claude, is how do you not just like cut his legs off, or like, you know, he's gonna, like in Cyborg, when they crucify him and you're gonna leave him up there with his legs, he's gonna kick his way down.
What are you doing? Yeah, like you gotta get rid of those things.
This guy Attila, he knows. No, I'm gonna punch him in the thighs just over and over again.
Oh my god, it's great. And I love too, like the whole underdog thing, of course, comes back into play, because the reason that he gets his triumphant moment and his confidence back is because he discovers that everyone is betting against him. So even his manager. So he's like, well, fuck you, and just, you know, does his whole scream slow-mo thing.
Gives him a last burst of rage mode energy.
Yeah, exactly.
Josh was like, I bet against you, just take the fall, we can like pay for your family. And he's like, fuck, at this point he just doesn't care about his family anymore. Like, I just fucking, I'm gonna win this fight now. Like, my motivations were to win money for my family. Now fuck you, I'm just gonna win the fight.
Yeah, because at that point, when he's like at first it's to avenge his brother, and then at a certain point he's looking his brother dead in the eye, and he's just like, I'm better than you. I can fight this guy.
Yeah. But what's funny about that detail too is that, like Joshua is telling him, like, I placed a bet against you. We can split it 50-50. Like your family will get paid for if you just like tap out right now. But he also knows that he will win money if he fights. So at that point, he's told, win or lose, your family is going to be paid. So he's just like, well, fuck that shit then. Like, I'm going to prove everyone wrong. And we do get to see the return of some of the Bruce Lee screams that he does in Bloodsport. And, you know, he's, you know, even kicking everyone around Attila while he's beating the shit out of him. You know, like people are trying to like get him off and are trying to get involved. And he's like, no.
But then, of course, he leaves him with a little bit of mercy because he's a good guy.
Oh, of course.
That look of intensity as he's like, he has his fist held, like he's like threatening, I will finish this guy off if he doesn't stay down. Is an incredibly good look from Jean-Claude.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and you get Joshua admitting to him after the scene kind of earlier in the film where he's the kind of explicates the idea where he's just like, you know, it's your damn heart. You're just too good of a person in such a terrible world. And that's why all of these bad things are happening to you and your family. And, you know, and then of course he has to admit that when he wins that fight and he gets, you know, everyone's like, great fight, Leo, your family's going to be okay now. And Joshua has to admit, you know, his heart, that's what won him that fight. And then he gets to go back to Helen covered in blood to prove what he was willing to do for them. And the Legionnaires are taking him back. But this is the best detail of this whole thing, because Van Damme wrote this once again. Van Damme writes himself a little monologue where his niece is like, how is it like fair that they are going to be taking you away after, like, clearly, you know, you exposed them for, you know, being these bad people, and you won despite them trying to rig it all against you, and you're paying off our medical bills, and, you know, you're back in our life, and the Legionnaire are still going to be pulling him away. And he gets to give this beautiful monologue where he's like, life is not too fair and ugly and stupid and mean, but sometime life is beautiful too.
Yeah.
And I have to go back to an ugly place, and if I don't, I'll be running for the rest of my life, and you and your mammy will be running with me. And you've seen too much ugly.
He's right.
And, yeah.
And then he's like, I'll always have something beautiful to remember. It's just like, it's so like romantic and all that shit. Like it's fantastic.
It's very heartfelt, and you can see it's being performed by a guy who believes it, because he co-wrote it, and he's just like, that's just it, man. That's what the movie's about, man. Life is ugly and stupid and mean out there, but you can do good and you can do beautiful things.
The power of love
in it.
That's right.
Yep. And the Legionnaires are so moved by it and listening to it that they are like, you know what, we're not going to take him back. We're going to drive him away and make it look like we're taking him away, let him out a few blocks out, and then he can run all the way back to his family. And they're tearing up, and
big crescendo as the camera pans up. It's just a beautiful
God, that shot of him
moment.
running over the hilly street to get back to them and everything.
Yeah,
amazing.
Just seeing his figure come and rise.
It has basically two endings. because it gets to have its bittersweet, like sad ending where the Legionnaires take him away, and then it gets to also do its happy ending. It
where they change their mind.
And even though I've seen this movie multiple times,
here,
both endings hit me every time. I'm like, yes, it is sad that he's going back to prison, and he is talking about how beautiful life is. It is sad, and then yes, it is extremely uplifting when he gets let go.
Yeah, and it feels just so. The decision for him to go back is just so quick, and it's funny to see the Legionnaire guards do this because they've been presented the entire time as really dangerous people that if he gets caught, that it's over. Just every single time they pop on camera, they're just very stern and mean looking.
They have no character except hating him.
Yeah, and then instantly they just see the love and can't help themselves. I think that's so funny and just uplifting in a way.
Either that or they're afraid after seeing him beat up Attila.
This is just Jean-Claude's aspiration. This is him telling you he wants. He can convert everyone with the power of goodness and with passion and heart,
I also love, too, even after he says that long monologue, I'll always have something beautiful to remember, he still gets in the car, and they do kind of a mid close-up kind of thing. He looks right at them, and he goes, I love you. And then the fucking car just drives away, leaving him out of frame. It's just, it's one thing after another in this finale, just to get the heart pumping.
Yep. and that is
Lionheart.
Lionheart. So for pivoting, I think towards the reductive rating round, this one gets a very solid 2. This is my first time watching it, so I'm going to give it the solid 3 for now. But I could see this even getting a little bit, into the high 3 territory for me a little bit, because I did have a really good time with it, and I do think it's quite. Kind of, again, I don't know that all of it will land for everyone. Some of the drama is very simple, and some of the performances are not they are better than previous Van Damme films hugely, but for this style of sort of class melodrama, you probably have better examples to point to. But if you could just get on the wavelength of what Van Damme wants to do and appreciate what it is that he got his shot at writing a star vehicle for himself, and he was like, I'm going to make an actual fighting class melodrama where it's still going to have me going AWOL from the bureaucrats, and it's still going to have me fighting sort of in a series of fighting events. But instead of being this cheap B movie with one-liners, it is going to have this kind of old-fashioned, shaggy, dramatic quality to it, and he's gonna see injustice in on the streets of New York, and he's gonna see people not able to afford medical bills, and he's gonna overcome it by the belief in doing the right thing and punching dudes in the dick. And the movie comes closer than it should to convincing you that Jean-Claude Van Damme could fix those issues by being who he is, and just even the fact that he wants you to be look, I want you to see me, Jean-Claude, bear witness to these things and take on these bloodthirsty elites and do that kind of stuff. And also, this is a slight upgrade, I will say. Lettich directing him as an actual character definitely contributes a lot to what makes this work. It also helps that they had Robert C. New, the cinematographer for this, who shot Prom Night and Night of the Creeps. It actually does kind of give it a little bit of nice lighting and location work and a gritty kind of crime movie texture to it. And obviously we talked about, even if the fighting by Letterboxd is not necessarily shot and cut the most impressively, especially in comparison to where Van Damme would get later in his career with the Hong Kong filmmakers, there is enough diversity in, how they chose to actually choreograph and give some of the fighters personality, like the guy who's saying, I don't know if I want to fight you or fuck you, or, fighting a wrestler in a squash court, or fighting a martial artist in a shallow pool, that kind of stuff. So
or a Scottish man surrounded by cars.
There's definitely more effort than, the montage fighting in Bloodsport, which again, there's some good fights in Bloodsport, especially some of the individually sequenced fighting. Yeah. But at a certain point, it was after montage after montage where fights just kind of blended together, they kind of felt like they didn't matter that much. It felt like they were, in terms of diversifying the look and the opponents, they were trying to put an effort into this one a little bit more. So yeah, Jean-Claude Van Damme, better dramatic actor then and the fact that this is what he wanted to do. He could have so easily just taken canon money for the rest of his career. He could have went Norris style. He could have just been like, just put me in one after another Bloodsport knockoff, put me in all 4 of the sequels, which he never did any of them. He was like, no, I'm going to write a movie. I'm going to push myself, as Brandon was pointing out. And yeah, it's fun to watch, even if it doesn't all completely work.
Yeah, totally. I think Lettich and Van Damme just have a really good understanding of each other. Especially specifically Lettich to Van Damme. You can tell that he knew what Van Damme was really good at, what he wanted to try to pull off, and just gave him the vehicle to do so, which is awesome. Because I do think Van Damme does a really good job, and it's crazy to see this much improvement over just like, what is it, a year or two? I think a year from Bloodsport. Was it 1989 Bloodsport?
88, I believe, and I think so Kickboxer was 89.
Okay, gotcha. But still, like, to see this kind of improvement and just kind of this confidence as a dramatic actor in this amount of time, being who he is, and kind of probably understanding what his image was after Bloodsport and Kickboxer, which was just like a really good-looking, kind of eccentric fighter. I just think that this is so awesome that he made the decision to try to be more of a dramatic actor at the same time, but still having all the fun split kicking and, kind of Bruce Lee slow-mo screams and all of that. I just think that he has such an understanding of what he wants and also how people view him. And I think that is pretty rare to be this self-aware when you're this kind of a star. So I just think that that's incredibly impressive. And the fighting is kind of fun. It's not the most exciting choreography, but some of the style really helps with that, especially when it comes to the locations. Like, it really does feel like an adventure when he goes from New York to LA and you're going to all these different locations that he's fighting in. And because of the different locations, he kind of has to adjust how he fights, and whoever he's fighting as well, he has to adjust that. So there's a lot here that's a lot of fun. And I would give it probably a 3, maybe a strong 3. I do think it's a little long, just given the kind of archetypes and stereotypes it dives into with the dramatic stuff. Because you know what's going to happen, but I do just love seeing Van Damme give it his all. So
did you guys have the scene where he just gets confronted by a gang in New York at one point?
He gets confronted by like a gang straight out of the Warriors.
Yeah, totally. And there was definitely part of me that I was like, I don't know how necessary this aspect is, other than they want to prove that, him and Joshua have to be made close. He has to start to trust Joshua, that he's not just like a guy who's, there to, take advantage and be part of the fighting scene, that this guy also kind of has a little bit of, he could also be like an actual person he has feelings for.
It does have the funniest moment in the movie, too, where Joshua chokes out a guy with the phone and then uses the phone while the guy is being choked out with it.
Yes.
That's good. But yeah, for me, it'd be a solid 3, maybe a strong 3. But it's good, and I definitely recommend it.
Yeah. For you, Brandon.
Acknowledging that I'm like usually 1 star above most people on Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, this is a 4 for me.
Nice.
Hell yeah.
I really do love this movie. You guys agree with everything you guys just said. It is like a big step up, I think, over the previous movies in terms of setting. I love like that we go through all these different stages for each fight. There is, maybe it's not the best action direction of the career of Jean-Claude Van Damme, but there are like such unique locations for each one of those fights, and these cartoon characters that he's fighting are entertaining. And as like that first step of Jean-Claude becoming a dramatic actor, it is such an important movie in his career, and an interesting one. And I think his, if not his best, his second best performance of the 90s. It's either this or Sudden Death, I think.
I love Sudden Death so
in terms
much.
of like dramatic performances, of course.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, it just, to me, like, this is just an easy watch. I love his relationship to the Joshua character. I think they have incredible chemistry. It is very smart to pair him with like a Motormouth character who can sort of in a classic wrestler manager sort of dynamic, have a guy who can give most of the dialogue, and then when you need the big moments to hit, it hits even harder when Van Damme finally speaks up. Like, he nails those monologues that he has to do throughout the movie. There's a moment where he finds out his brother's dead, and like the look on his face as he's talking to the doctor is just, it's really affecting. I think as he struggles with dialogue, like his face is always really expressive, even early on. Yeah, I know I love the performance. I think Sheldon Lettich is like surprisingly a really solid director. And I think the main advantage of him, I think, on top of really getting the appeal of Jean-Claude, is if maybe they're not the deepest stories in film, I think he really nails story structure across every script he's ever written for Jean-Claude. This movie, I think all his movies are structured pretty well. They flow really well. I don't know. It's just, I love this movie. It's 4 stars for me.
Hell
Nice.
yeah. Hell yeah.
Love that.
Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for Lionheart. We are going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about Double Impact. Stick around.
They're damn quick,
Express service.
damn cool, damn hot.
So now what do we do? That's what I love about you.
Van Damme times 2. Double the fun
I would never in my life wear black silk underwear. I'm with you on that one.
and double the Van Damage. Double Impact.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Double Impact, the 1991 martial arts action film directed by Sheldon Lettich once again co-written and co-produced and co-starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. These two boys, they also gave themselves story by credits on this one as well. They're getting fancy with it. You know, they're not just coming up with the writing. You know, they're doing all of it. And in between Lionheart and this, he did have Death Warrant come out in between them, which is a very funny one to come out between. I did watch briefly because I had a little bit of extra time this week, and I was kind of like, you know what, I'll throw on the one they did in between as well. And what I didn't know going into that one, that it was the debut of hotshot screenwriter David S. Goyer, and has Van Damme playing a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer investigating a series of murders inside a corrupt prison. So the movie is
In
like
LA, I think.
Yeah,
Right?
it's so like it's
I
sort
don't
of a
understand how
prison
the
movie.
logic of that story goes, because it's like,
No.
why is a Mountie in the U.S.
The one going
investigating
undercover. Yeah.
a U.S. serial killer? But it's cool because he kicks a guy into a furnace, and that's really all you need.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's exactly what I was gonna say. I was like, it's sort of a prison movie. It's sort of an undercover cop movie. It's like sort of a slasher because the serial killer gets like some kind of gnarly killing sequences, and it's not really particularly
Sandman.
great at being any one of those 3 movies. But it does climax, as Brandon said, on Van Damme like drop kicking the bad guy into an incinerator while he screams "Welcome to Hell." So you know, I was definitely like, I was glad that I checked it out.
That's good. That's a fun movie.
But after Lionheart and after his run-in with doing all of these martial arts films, because the thing about Lionheart that we kind of mentioned is that it's still sort of like a series of martial arts fighting scenes, and
Right.
sort of set up not in like the kind of situations of like a martial arts film where they just get into fights over the drama of the story. There is actually like there's not a full-on tournament, but there is
Might as well be.
there's an economy around the business of fighting in a similar way. So you could tell definitely going into Double Impact that him and Lettich were, they were already expanding the dramatics and the range of characters that he could play, but they were like, how can we also expand his range of action? And so if Lionheart saw him moving into class melodrama, if Death Warrant saw him going into kind of crime procedural a little bit, he wanted to take it to the next step, which was a dual role, which, as Jamie mentioned at the top of the show, he was inspired to do because of Jeremy Irons' amazing performance that we talked about on the show in David Cronenberg's Dead Ringers, which he watched and he loved. But Lettich and Van Damme both also claim to have taken inspiration, this is my favorite part of this, from Alexander Dumas's novella. I forget.
Isn't it from like 1800s or something
The
like
Corsican
that?
Brothers?
The Corsican Brothers. That's exactly right. About 2 conjoined brothers who are separated at birth, but who can still like feel each other's physical sort of like attributes and the pain that they are. So they're still sort of connected in that way, almost psychically. And they went, we need Van Damme to do that character. And one of the best details I found researching this was that Van Damme was so in love with this idea, he actually pitched this to Albert Pune on Cyborg. And that was who he wanted to do it with. And Pune actually was like, "Are you really sure you want to do like the gimmick, like 2-person, like same, thing?" He's like, "I don't know if you need to do that, dude." And Van Damme, credit to him, he stuck with it, and he was like, "No, I actually do want to do it, and it won't just be a gimmick. I actually want to play 2 different characters who have actual drama with one another." And in this case, the loose log line here is he's playing Alex and Chad Wagner, 2 estranged brothers who, like the Alexander Dumas story, are separated at birth when their parents are killed, and they are raised by separate families, one in Paris and one in Hong Kong, which is obvious ways to, one, make sense of his accent, and 2, also make sense of where his fighting skills are coming from. So he loves picking locations that he's from that just work with his actual backstory. But these 2 brothers find each other 25 years later in order to get some revenge on who it was who killed their parents, which turns into a full-on like crime conspiracy
story. It's very confusing.
It gets crazy, actually.
I was confused the first time I watched this movie. I did not get the story the first time I ever watched this. I think it took like 2 or 3 watches to come around to like, I think I understand the machinations of what's going on.
Yes. And again, it's very ambitious. Like similarly to Lionheart, you can tell immediately like the kinds of movies that you've seen these kinds of movies before, but he's like, Van Damme is like, I can also do those kinds of movies. You can tell that he's putting in the effort to really show you. And in this, like he starts off with like just a pretty impressive, like gruesome chase and action sequences, which happens during a celebratory unveiling of like this new tunnel that's been built in Hong Kong by their the brother's father, Paul Wagner, and his business partner, Nigel Griffith, played by Alex Scarf, actually, which was funny because we just mentioned him briefly in when we had Peter Kaplowski on and we talked about The Wrong Guy. He was the farmer, Jamie. So I was like, damn, we just talked about that guy recently. But so him and his business partner have built this bridge in Hong Kong, or this tunnel in Hong Kong. And on the ride home, his dad dismisses their bodyguard, Frank Avery, played by Jeffrey Lewis, who's an awesome actor and spectacular.
Choosing every line. He's incredible.
He's awesome. And I especially love him as in Thunderbolt and Lightfoot with Clint Eastwood. But we also, again, I think talked about him recently when we went on the Soundtracker podcast, Jamie, because he was in Rob Zombie's Devil's Rejects as well. Mm-hmm. So Jeffrey Lewis, wonderful actor, and he gets dismissed away from protecting, the person that he's watching over, Paul Wagner. And the second that he stops tailing the person he's supposed to be protecting, they all of a sudden get pursued by some Triad members intent on assassinating Wagner and his wife. And this scene, like, again, talk about both movies kind of opening with a bang. You get a dude lit on fire and charred in the opening of Lionheart. In this, you get the return of Bolo Yeung, who from Bloodsport, who shows up as a henchman with a shotgun. Ooh. And this is just not a badly directed little shootout, honestly. Like, great use of the stark, like, headlight beams and broken glass and squibs and splatter all over the cars.
It's brutal.
It's brutal.
It's pretty ruthless, too, just the way it presents the death of the mother and father as well, especially the mother. Like, it doesn't have the impact, which I think probably would have been way too over the top. But just the fact that it's like a point blank gunshot to the head from a shotgun in front of her children.
And the fact that it's built up with, she asks like, what's going to happen to my kids? And Bolo Young's answer is like, you'll never know.
You'll never know. Yeah, there's a real coldness to that. Like, holy hell. Yeah, that's just evil.
And then executing her in front of like 2 screaming babies in the back of the car and stuff like that. And, and even just throwing in some details too, like Bolo nearly gets his face shot off by Jeffrey Lewis when Frank, the bodyguard, shows back up.
He gets a Bond villain scar. He gets like the Bond henchman scar on his face.
Yeah, there's a little bit of Bond action going on here. I mean, they even drop a literal Sean Connery reference where they're saying that Jeffrey Lewis kind of has some Sean Connery vibes at one point, and they have to go, into a club in tuxedos, trying to pull off some little espionage
to plan a bomb, but instead it's like a lot more kind of clumsy in a way, just because the bomb isn't like this secret, it's not like a little device that sticks to the wall or something like that. It's just in a giant box that's supposed to have like it's some type of drink that the leader
supposed to have
likes.
like bourbon in it or something.
Yeah, and that's what they're using
cognac.
to kind of plant it. Yeah,
Cognac,
that's what it was. But it's just it
Well,
feels,
specifically from France, they were like, you got to smuggle in the nice French cognac. Yeah.
Yes, so of course they have Van Damme doing it, and it just I do find it funny that they have those elements of like a almost super spy kind of stuff, but then it's all a lot more blunt.
Yeah, and Frank, very luckily for Jeffrey Lewis playing Frank here, like very luckily he shows up and shoots back and starts shooting people's faces off. It's a very bloody shootout that he has, and he escapes with one of the babies, Chad, who he takes to France, and the other baby, Alex, is taken by the maid, who takes him and drops him off at an orphanage in Hong Kong.
I love, like, Jeffrey Lewis, he tells her, take the kids, and she takes one of them. So I have to imagine that was just her favorite kid.
Yeah.
Because afterward he looks in the car and goes, like, he's surprised that there's an extra baby in the car. It's like, oh, she just took her favorite.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't really like Chad that much.
And while he's carrying Chad too, I love that they clear up like you would think it would be like a big reveal, because I was sitting there going, well, it's of course his business partner is the one who orchestrated all of this, but it's not treated like a late in the movie reveal. They're just like straight up like, no, Frank sees Griffith, his business partner, just like smoking a cigar alongside the Hong Kong gangster, who in this case is played is a guy named Raymond Zhang, played by Philip Chan, who once again from Bloodsport, but also the lieutenant in Hard Boiled, which is obviously just an iconic performance and what I think about every time I see him.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And smash cut to 25 years later in 1991, we have Chad leading a stretching class for women at his karate dojo.
Just showing off those splits specifically. Like we were just talking about Lionheart, where he doesn't do splits at all. He sort of wanted to differentiate it by not doing like goofy splits. He felt that like didn't make the movie serious. Here, this movie, his first appearance in the movie, his butt's in the center frame.
Yeah,
right there.
And
he's like, look at me.
And it's so obvious that they're doing it too. Like with a couple other ones, like they have a butt shot in Lionheart right when he goes. Well, of course it's the one with the robe, but there's also one where he's got his like bathing suit or leotard on before he goes into the pool fight, and they have a big shot of his butt before he walks into the pool. But it still kind of seems like, you see his character walk into the camera and then out into the pool, whereas this one is just the entire shot is obviously framed to just be like, look at that ass. And they go back to it like 4 or 5 times. And not to mention the implications of like the kind of the sexual nature of the scene, where it opens with him like stretching a girl, and they are obviously
helping
having
her spread her
innuendos.
legs better.
Yeah. And then, he's just like, this is how I do the splits so easily. Look at me. And he's like winking at them essentially. So it's just all that kind of sexual energy is there from the very beginning, and kind of comedy too, because it's obvious that they're kind of poking fun at it a little bit.
Yeah, but like he's helping her stretch, and the shot is like from her point of view, so he's looking directly into the camera and her eyes and being like, "Oh yeah, that's nice. Yeah, you're
It's shot
doing
like
that.
a sex
you're,
scene.
Yeah, you're doing that well." And they're all giggling and like oogling him in his like skin tight pastel colored leggings and tank top, and and it's funny too, because like all of the women clearly love it, and he's immediately told by Frank, who's like, hey, I got a business thing. You got to go like teach the karate class for a second. And he's just like, look at my outfit. Like, you're really going to have me go teach the karate class? And he goes in there and everyone starts like ripping on his clothes. They were like, what, are you here to teach the ballet? Which is another very obviously meta acknowledgement too, because they're being like, yeah, Jean-Claude is not embarrassed of the fact that he does ballet and he does it well. Right. And he uses his skills to knock that dude out with a single kick, basically.
Yeah. So you can't mess with my confidence.
So we're being told right off the bat that the character of Chad, and I think this is the reason too, I think it's because he gets to do two different performances. He was okay leaning back into the character that people kind of know Jean-Claude for a little bit. And he was like,
seems purposeful.
what is like the silliest, most straight arrow version of my persona?
Yes.
And that is Chad. He has everything that I do. He has my ballet. He has my karate.
The drip.
He has, he has the drip. He's got the playing to a female audience kind of aspect. Like they're acknowledging that Chad might as well be Jean-Claude Van Damme.
He's
as
naive,
he actually
like
is.
a lot of the early Jean-Claude characters are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Totally.
He's definitely doing the puppy dog innocent routine that he sometimes, could be known for. And because of a proposed business, quote unquote, venture with Frank, he decides that he's going to travel to Hong Kong. And I do love that he does it. And you get a little bit of like that travelogue imagery that we talked about that happened in both Bloodsport and Kickboxer, where they're just kind of just taking in Hong Kong and how gorgeous it is and all of the locations that they're going to. But you do get to see Chad. His version of these travelogue images is he's got the shortest pink shorts you've ever seen and a golf polo. And, he's having a blast and he's smiling. He's going to the Mahjong parlor, and it's there where things get a little bit messier because he is mistaken by his brother's girlfriend for being Alex, despite the difference in hair and accent and clothes. Straight
His
up.
breath doesn't smell like cigar.
Yeah. His hair's not slicked back. He's not wearing like leather jacket. He's wearing literally pink short shorts. And also the black silk underwear, which is probably like the line of one of the lines of the movie at least, where he's just like, you of all people should know I never wear black silk underwear.
It's such a great line delivery.
Yeah, he almost drops the D on it too. He's like unaware. I would never wear black silk unaware.
Oh my God.
It's wonderful. And right off the bat, too, you can tell that Jean-Claude was actually inspired by Cronenberg because Cronenberg obviously did it in a much more deliberately perverse and provocative way on how those two twin brothers choose to share women. But that is, that's immediately you can tell that he was like, no, the first thing that happens and how these brothers are going to get messed up and how they're actually going to get so dramatically involved with one another is over their relationship to a girl who likes both of them because they look the same, but one of them might have a better personality than the other one. And Alex gets throughout the film he gets increasingly upset about the idea that his girlfriend might actually prefer Chad.
Right. Yeah. Which leads, and I won't get to it yet, but which leads to just one of the
best scenes in the movie
ever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. And there's lots of good scenes throughout. Character. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's the least secure character he's ever played.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because he has this, like we said, this underdog quality, but there's still a confidence to that. It's like he knows his position, but he knows that he can elevate from there. And with this one, he just seems like this character actually seems kind of stuck, which is not usually where he is. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, and also very, kind of like he's playing a character that you feel the real Van Damme would be critical of, and he's relishing in the chance to play it because he also gets the good version of himself in there. He kind of the fact that he gets to do one means that he is willing to change the image and harm the image a little bit in some ways that is like. Again, he wasn't someone who really necessarily, wanted to indulge in being a villain because he did get to play the villains kind of like earlier on, and he found them just kind of, I think, stale as an actor to play. They were kind of one note. The good guy had to eventually just beat the shit out of them. But in this, he does get to play a little bit more of like a complex antagonist to Chad, where but still also get those cool elements. Like when he shows up as Alex in this. He's chomping on the biggest cigar you've ever seen. He's got the slicked back hair. We get introduced to his world where he's basically like a criminal operator, and he smuggles cars and smuggles cigarettes and all kinds of illegal contra into Hong Kong. And they are just like complete opposites in attitude and look. Like it's literally the bright versus dark way that they dress, the way that Chad is very much like a straight moral arrow, and Alex is a little bit more, he's willing to be a criminal operator. And at first, obviously, they definitely don't get along, which is to be expected. That's why you would write two characters like this, especially when Frank tries to put them together under a uniting force, which is, let's go get Raymond Zhang and let's go get Griffith. Let's go get revenge on these guys who killed their parents. And it does lead to some cool little moments of like mistaken identity as well. Like I do like that scene where Zhang picks up Chad in his nice car, thinking that it's Alex and thinking that he's going to try and convince him to join his, sort of smuggling operation.
Yeah.
But Chad, who is the straight arrow, is like, obviously not. Like, I would never do that. Whereas Alex, previously he might have been able to be a little bit, he could have been bent a little bit in that direction, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure. And isn't even the his girlfriend working for Zhang? Or is it Griffith?
She's working for
She's working for Griffith.
Griffith, yeah. Right.
Who she describes as the most legitimate businessman she's ever seen.
Of course. Yeah. So he's already kind of connected in a sense to the bad side of things, I guess.
Yes. And the girlfriend's name is Danielle, and she's played by Alana Shaw from Abel Ferrara's King of New York.
Yeah.
If anyone remembers. So, and in the early goings here, it's so funny, like, because again, part of it is that Danielle, like, Alex is concerned that Danielle likes Chad more, and literally it's because of like she's like laughing at his penis jokes and like saying things like,
which he says a lot of in this, by the way.
Yeah, he has quite a few of them.
A lot of penis jokes.
And she's also, because of their mission that they're going on to expose Griffith and Zhang, she's doing a little bit of hunting at her at her office, trying to, find out, see if she can find any evidence for them. And there's one part where she's on the phone and she literally calls up Alex and she's like, give Chad like a big old kiss for me or something like that. And you can just see like the Kill Bill sirens going off in Alex's head a little bit.
Yeah, and he responds with something like, I'll give him a big kick in the ass or something like that.
Yeah. But then immediately he's like, but I love you.
Yeah, I love you. And then hangs up. Yeah. It's so funny. Like, yeah, it is kind of funny to watch that character. It almost feels like she's just playing with him the entire time, and just having him play it so, like, he's supposed to be kind of the macho version of Van Damme, or at least, I mean, they're macho, but in the sense of more, he's stern and he's like less emotional, less vulnerable. But yet he's pretty much being like kind of cucked in a sense the entire movie. And I just find that that contrast of things to be very interesting.
It's definitely the first time that Jean-Claude has ever been cucked on screen. Like, that would just,
and he's doing
that situation doesn't make any sense
for himself. He's like, the only person cucking me is me. You understand? That's just great. Right. That's fantastic.
It's the only person who could. It's the only way. Yeah. It's the only believable. Yeah, exactly.
He was racking his brain. He was writing this screenplay, and he's just like, you know what? The only person that could play this guy is me. Who else would believe it? So I'm writing it in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't Jeremy Irons.
The action here is very, very different from any of the previous Jean-Claudes that we've talked about. Because one, we were talking about like a really gruesome, like brutal executions and blood splatter and destruction on the opening set piece there. But then you get this little boat action scene in this where, there's this part where they're like being chased by the cops and they're trying to, interrupt Alex's car smuggling that he's doing. It involves them having to do some pretty big stuff, like dump the Mercedes off the boats into the water and then shoot rifles at them until they explode to get away from the cops.
Yeah, it's awesome. And there's also kind of a scene where it feels kind of like a throwback to, I believe it's Bloodsport, where they travel along the boats that are on the water and they're jumping from boat to boat before they escape.
Yes,
but this one is cool because it turns into more of a kind of a fight sequence. It's not very long, but you got him like swirling around a pole and kicking a guy into the water. That
like side-scrolling dolly shot where they're literally leaping boat to boat to boat is really nice, actually.
Yeah, that wide shot of all the boats is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he just dives into the water and gets away, of course.
There's another way it gets away from the Bloodsport types, which is in Chad's first fight. He gets hit in the dick.
Oh, yeah.
By the bad guys. A little reversal of fortune. They've been watching
He's
his
like-
movies.
Yeah, he's like, I've been given enough dick punches. I've got to take one now.
It's only fair.
Yeah, well, and it
of
is
honor.
interesting because you do get to see him do a little bit more like traditional action hero stuff, like just like kind of like jumping into the air and kicking dudes off the boat, but instead of like doing a super fancy jump kick, he just kind of like lifts himself up by his hands a little bit, you know, like that kind of stuff. Like he's not doing. And it, obviously it does get a little bit more athletic when it gets to the finale, but they're trying to set up that Alex is more of like your kind of typical slugger a little bit in that regard, and you know. There is a little bit more of the kicking and the martial arts action going on when he refuses to work for Zhang and he's getting like beaten up by his henchmen and all that kind of stuff, because it's kind of set up that Chad is like the more actual kind of martial arts fighter between the two of them, even though by the end Alex might as well be doing it as well. So
They put it on the poster, one packs a punch, one packs a piece.
Right.
yeah,
Which is just, that's the two characters right there.
Which
yeah,
I like
well, 'cause,
as
yeah,
a,
Alex
as a
gets
thing.
to do the gun fu, man.
I like as a comment on the movie too. I do wish that there was a little bit more like karate stuff as well mixed with the guns, but I do like that there's that mix and they kind of have it represented through the characters as much as they can.
Oh yeah, I mean the first scene when they finally agree that like, look, there is bad shit happening here. Like my smuggling operation is going down. Zhang is clearly coming after us, and you know we've met each other. We have to do something about this. They set up their own like private military operation in an abandoned hotel on a nearby island, where Alex basically proves his criminal bona fides in a moment, where Alex tells him that he got screwed on, or Chad tells him that he got screwed on his arms purchase of like the guns that he bought for them or smuggled in for them. And Alex just fires an entire clip into a pot, breaking Chad's eardrums. And you just get Van Damme being like, looks good to me. And that's it. He's just like, man, I'm good with the gun, man. And then that leads into them doing the attack on the actual drug smuggling operation, where Alex gets like a sick neck snap by just like quickly pressing a dude's forehead and back at the same time. It's like, you know, just gone.
Right.
And
that was an
another
interesting one.
decent little and then another decent little shootout with Alex straight up doing the gun fu, like dual wielding pistols and doing rolls in slow motion while firing into tables and like drug cooking materials, and like very clearly it's Lettich and Van Damme trying to do a little bit of a knockoff Hong Kong action. But I will say, Hong Kong action, you know, it's like, yeah, set up a lot of real practical destruction, get a guy holding two guns, getting a real athlete doing a flip or a maneuver, shoot it in slow motion. It's a little bit easier for them to pull off than some of the martial arts thing. Like I thought the action in this was for Lettich as a director was an improvement over Lionheart.
Yeah.
That scene at the drug den, like bits of like vials and stuff, making materials are flying everywhere. It's very John Woo. It's like they beat John Woo to making it to the US, because this is 2 years before Hard Target would bring John Woo over.
Yes.
Okay,
and it is like poetry that Jean-Claude was the one who brought him over too. That was
Yeah,
like,
it's
I will make your
awesome.
first American movie.
I feel like in a way this is sort of his pitch to John Woo, like, please come over and do this scene with me.
Yes.
Yeah, but for a whole
for
film.
the whole movie.
Yeah. Which he totally
I promise I can be
accomplished.
good.
Oh my god. And he's probably got the best hairstyle that he's ever had in Hard Target as well. So
Oh yeah.
It's so sick.
anyway, yeah, that's a good movie.
Yeah. Yeah, but and Lettich, I think, does prove himself a little bit more. Like just the way that he shoots and kind of cuts this stuff, and even just having like good little moments within the action. I thought like that brief moment where there's like the red laser on Chad's forehead and like and he thinks he's about to get shot, and then Frank comes in and snipes the guy, or the really intense like blue directional lighting that's like bathed all over Alex as he leaps from the ground onto his feet in slow motion, and everything just blowing up as they drive away. I mean, this film is shot by Richard H. Klein, who's the guy who shot Body Heat, The Fury, for De Palma,
nice.
various Charles Bronson and Clint Eastwood films, the Richard Gere Breathless remake, and tons of Richard Fleischer films, including Soylent Green, The Boston Strangler, Mandingo. Like, he's an incredible cinematographer, and I think that this is probably of the Van Dammes that we've talked about so far this month, this was my favorite looking one.
Oh yeah, I could probably see that. I think I'd agree.
He goes so
I mean,
hard on
just
the
having
colored
Richard
lighting
H.
there.
Klein shooting Hong Kong, it's beautiful.
Yeah, 100%. And even certain things like some of the simpler stuff that they just do with Van Damme, like there's a really awesome shot where he's shooting a gun, and he's kind of like laying over a body, and he's got this like tight black shirt on, and for some reason they're not looking really at the impact shots. They're just watching him shoot the gun with his just like bulging bicep going back and forth. Mm-hmm. And I just love how they so lovingly film him even when he's doing like the grittiest shit. It's awesome. I love that.
And also seeing him get to do a little bit, because we mentioned it briefly, but that scene where they get to do like a bit of the Bond thing and they sneak their way into the club in tuxedos, and one girl in the club is even like, Jeffrey Lewis, man, you kind of look like Sean Connery, dude. And then you have Zhang and Griffith who are celebrating, which is, it's funny that they go to the club to celebrate how great their illegal drug dealing is going, thanks to DEA policy. Because once again, woke King Van Damme, he's just like, yeah, man, the Americans, they're helping these criminals make all their money that they're making.
That's
and
right.
And then Van Damme shows up, and I guess it's kind of hard to say Van Damme shows up because there's two of them, but both Alex and Chad show up to this club, and they try to deliver a bomb, saying it's the liquor that he smuggled in for him. And the way that they just like blow their way out of that place with the bombs and the spin kicks, like it's so sick. And there's one great detail of the scene where Griffith's bodyguard is her name is Kara, and she is played by just a legitimate female bodybuilder. So they set up multiple henchmen so that each one kind of takes on a henchman in the film. And one of them is just a dude, a kickboxer who wears cowboy spurs. Yeah. And the other one is the female bodybuilder, and who is the only woman who has bigger thighs than Jean-Claude Van Damme. And that's literally the only reason they hired her. You can tell, like, she gets introduced.
And they film her like that too. They film her the same way they film Van Damme when they're like kind of oogling at his muscles and stuff.
It's like they beat Bond to having Xenia on a top as a character.
Yes. And she and they were straight up like look, she gets introduced like stabbing a guy for Griffith, but not before crushing him with her thighs, like his head between her thighs.
She does that several times throughout the film. Like there's, I think even her introduction into the final scene, like she's been introduced, but just when she appears, is her like hanging from a pole and then wrapping her legs around him. She literally like
flies down from the rafters in order to get her thighs on his head, and she's also very sexual.
Yeah, they have that scene with Danielle where she kind of kind of molests her a little bit and tries to get information, and they have like the way that the camera is, it's almost on the ground looking up at them, and she's in these like super tight leather pants, so once again it's accenting the like muscular thighs and all of that. And they really film her the kind of the same way as Van Damme, except she's obviously presented as evil and bad and all that.
Yeah, and her being caught by Griffith and the bodyguard is what leads to Chad being the one to have to like get Danielle out of there. So that's where they get like the big chase scene around the Lippo building in Hong Kong, which is a really just cool location. It's a really cool like piece of architecture. Mm-hmm. And that's when you get like the dude with the cowboy spurs like spin kicking a dude's like throat open. Yeah. Which is like a crazy graphic moment. And you get henchmen just like getting hit by cars and going flying. Like the level of just like ambitious stunt work that they threw into this, and violence and action like by Lettich, it's definitely a step up in that department. And you know, we talked about the part where they're leaping like boat to boat, and it's just really impressive.
It is interesting to see them, because the film, it starts with like we were saying, it's almost comedy, like he's almost playing with his image and all of that. But then as the film goes, it is one of the grittier ones that I've seen, and so I find that interesting that they kind of dove deeper into both sides of his personality a little bit. And it works really, really well. Like even I like the lighting in the factory or steam room, with like just all the reds and you know, they're like tied to pipes, and then they use the actual hot steam to torture Frank, and like it's just way grittier than some of the other things that we've seen.
There's the fight at the end with the henchman with the spurs, and it's in pitch black darkness except spotlights on our main characters.
All the shadows, the spotlight,
It's just, I forget which Jean-Claude is fighting. I forget if it's Alex or Chad. and it just keeps going like, oh, he gets hit out of nowhere because this guy is using the darkness to just do hit and run tactics with his spurs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the sound design, because it strips everything away, and all you hear is the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh of his spurs and his boots, like just narrowly missing it, like cutting him open and stuff. It's so sick.
Yeah.
This movie is made like a group of artists who had something to prove, and like we're putting everything they had on the table, regardless of anything. So it's like they're shooting as far as they can with this convoluted conspiracy story, and they're shooting as far as they can with setting up set pieces that it's like, oh, well, we need a pitch black fight, and we need this steamy industrial a room that's all reds and grays and steam blowing. We need to have the heaviest colored lighting in every scene. We need to do a John Woo gunfight. It's people firing as hard and all cylinders as they can to prove that like they're here and like they're announcing themselves as real artists at every level of production.
Yeah, no, and it's great. Like it totally pays off for them, because like after the bit where he saves Danielle, which eventually at a certain point leads into like a full out like a helicopter pursuit, which I was like, oh my god, like how many, like his budget levels were definitely going up at this point.
Yeah, I think this one was 15 million compared to like the 6 million that they had last time. So
yeah,
and you can see it.
And which leads into a scene that breaks the Jean-Claude Van Damme rule, which is that they don't show his full-on butt in this scene, but they do show Danielle getting full naked on screen. And I was kind of like, I was a little like, oh, I don't know about that, man. I don't know about that choice, Van Damme. But it is broken in an interesting way, because you can claim that this was entirely the drunken, angry fantasy on Alex's part, thinking that Chad, who just saved his girlfriend, wasn't just doing it because he's kind of like a good guy and a puppy dog who's just like, you know, being like, well, the girl's in trouble, we should get her out of there. He instead thinks that he has motives to make a move on Danielle. And when Alex is just like, you know, you just have the slicked back, like very tortured Van Damme, just like barely keeping himself up while he's walking, almost falling over the banister, taking a swig of his whiskey. And
it goes on for a bit too.
it does. And it just is straight up like, in a sort of slow-mo neon dream world, Chad and Danielle are just having the steamiest sex anyone has ever had in this incredibly meta moment, as Jamie put it, of Van Damme literally cucking himself and going into hysterics about it. Like literally like screaming and crying about
God,
it. Like,
I love that.
They snuck like a softcore porn fever dream into this movie.
Yeah, it's got like purple and yellow dream world lighting. Like it seems completely surreal. It's not. You can tell that, you know, I guess that's part of the separation of it. It's like you can tell he's imagining it because of the way they stylize it.
It's unreal in its stylization.
It's
Yeah,
definitely a sex scene that has never happened in a Van Damme movie. It is definitely Alex's idea of what a Van Damme sex scene is.
yeah, totally. And I guess, and then that leads into their kind of confrontation where, like, I think,
chill out, man.
Yeah.
Oh, chill out, Mr. California. Oh, Mr. Silk Underwear.
We know like Alex is the bad brother because he says the F word.
Yes, that's true.
I might be
Which,
drunk,
by the way, is
but
the
I'll be
final
sober
straw.
in the morning. And he'll always be.
Man, it's so blunt when he says it too. I think he says it twice. It's actually, if I'm not mistaken, it might be his first line as that character when he wakes up.
Well,
After he mentions the black silk underwear the first time, he also calls Chad the F word in that scene.
Yeah. Like as soon as he's
They really want you to know that this is the edgy brother.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, and you finally get what you came for, Van Damme versus Van Damme. And I will say, obviously, this scene is done with over-the-shoulder doubles,
Yeah.
but it's not a bad
good.
little fight.
No, it's not bad. They even do a cool move where there's one part where he takes him over the banister and they like fall a story together. And in order to do it, they have a little bit of a scuffle, and then what Van Damme does to the stunt guy is like covers his face as they push him, so that they can still have kind of a frontward image of it, and like you can still see kind of his front of his body and torso while he's falling. It's just it's well choreographed, and it feels pretty fluent. There's moments, of course, that you can tell, but there's a couple really convincing moments that I enjoyed.
Yeah, well, no, and he just gets to. It's the big fight where he definitely gets to do the most stuff with his feet and with his kicking, because those guys are just like going at each other when they are, like there's a certain point where, I think Chad tries to like windmill kick him like 4 or 5 times in a row and keeps missing because he keeps dodging. But like, this is definitely the big moment where you get like some of the blood sport fighting in this, and also the fact that it's shot in the dirty over the shoulders. You get what's always been one of my favorite qualities of watching any Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, is that when you shoot a Van Damme fight and he kicks someone, it's so sick when they do it in like the classic dirty over the shoulder, where you think that like, a normal actor would just punch another actor in that shot.
Right.
But Van Damme, his legs will just like fly out of the bottom of the frame. And you're like, where did those come from? The like crazy snakes that you're like, where, how does, it doesn't quite make sense, but that's just the beauty of Van Damme in a way. And yeah, this is definitely like some of the best. Like even Lettich, again, I think he kind of improved as like shooting the fight scenes in this, and it's crazy that he did it while also handling the difficulty of Van Damme, having to fight a Van Damme stunt double in every reverse shot that he was doing. So
yeah,
it's a pretty good little fight.
Yeah, and I do like some of the effects that they do, like just with the green screen effect, I assume that they do, where they split the image so that they're in the same room. There is one that's a little wonky where they're in the same
where they're in the car.
Yeah, that you can kind of see the outlines a little bit, but for the most part they're pretty seamless, and that was fun to watch them kind of interact
like the
with
one
each
near
other.
the end where the one's shirtless and they both just kind of smile at each other. Like that one's pretty good actually.
It's a hard effect to pull off, let alone like do a whole fight with them together. And the fact that like it looks as seamless as it does for most of the movie is just.
It's impressive.
It's as good as it could have gone.
Yeah, I think so too. Given the budget and just given I imagine the technology that they had at the time, like I don't know if I've seen like what. Do you guys remember any other examples where they've kind of used this technique? I know it's been used, of course.
Well, the one that inspired it is obviously the big one, right? Like Dead Ringers. Like Dead Ringers is probably the best previous example of it being done, but only because when we talked about that, like Cronenberg was doing like walk and talk like tracking scenes of them side by side in the same shot, and like you're just like, come on, dude, fuck you.
Too talented, motherfucker.
He had to do some like motion controlled rigging to manage that one for sure. And obviously, Irons is in terms of dramatic ability, he's definitely operating at a level Van Damme not quite at this point in his career. I don't think that's unfair to say, but Van Damme, again, you can't just you still got to respect it. Like even if he's playing it up and he's playing into some sort of sillier archetypes of, here's the most good a Van Damme character could be, and here's kind of like the most bad boy a Van Damme character could be, and who's still like, he's still the good guy of the film too, which is funny because Van Damme can't quite go that far, but he does get to, get him shooting people and being a little bit more ruthless with some of the violence. And even their breakup moment doesn't last very long, because the next morning after they have their fight over Danielle, Zhang straight up storms the island beach with his men, resulting in Alex and Chad kind of having to go like commando mode and just like dispatch various henchmen after henchmen on the island with like punches to the throats, elbows to the face, kicks to the heads, various neck snaps and flipping and slow-mo shootouts. And honestly, I gotta say, there's one part in this where Alex is the Jean-Claude who uses more guns than martial arts. And, we said one of the many pleasures of Jean-Claude is that he's very much not just like a beefcake who shoots a gun, but he's an incredible athlete. He looks pretty good firing a gun in slow motion, man. Like when he picks up that pistol and you just see his bicep having the full effect of the gun hitting it and the impact going, I was like, dude, Van Damme, he still looks pretty good, man.
And like I said earlier, in that shot where they do the big bicep shot, like they're almost not even paying attention to who he's shooting at. They're just like, look how fucking good this guy looks shooting this.
They hold it for so long, and that is an incredible shot. I always like draw little pictures of shots I love in movies, and that was one of the ones I drew from this movie. I'm like, I need to bring this up. It is just incredible.
They hold it for so long. He fires like a whole clip in slow motion.
It's awesome. And then it like cuts eventually after they've just been like, that was amazing, Jean-Claude. You're just so good looking. They finally cut to the impact, and it's only like 4 bullets into 2 guys. But I just love how they had to just focus on him emptying an entire clip because it's just cinema, baby.
Yep. Yeah,
So
and they
awesome.
eventually fight their way onto the barge ship that Griffith and Zhang have kidnapped Frank on, because this thing keeps changing locations. They keep wanting to show you something new. They kept wanting to shoot somewhere else, so they go from these island fights to these boat fights where Brandon was talking about briefly, like that crazy surreal neon lit boiler room with like the smoke and the steam everywhere, and the various shootouts taking place within the innards of the ship, and tons of like squib gunfire and everything as well, and that obviously insane borderline expressionist fight with the dude with the spurs, which we should mention again just for the brief part, which is one of my favorite parts, which is that obviously the scene is meant to be these guys can't see each other, and like it is pitch black, and we are seeing it via these very white spotlights that almost make it look like an 80s music video or something. And so we only again see the flashes of feet in motion and hearing the whooshes as this fight is taking place. But one of my favorite parts of this is the moment where, Van Damme is fighting this henchman, and this guy is, just appearing out of nowhere, just going whoosh, whoosh. He can't see where he's coming from, and he just fist punches the wall, and all of a sudden the light bleeds through, and all of a sudden he can see. And as soon as he has his eyesight back, he grabs him by his collar and just punches him to death in a shot where you can see like their muscle shadow figures lit against the wall, almost like an expressionist horror thing. And he's just pummeling this dude. And he even gets like this big moment where he straight up, like, the punching happens over and over again. He takes a big pause and then just boom, one last huge hit. He's like, whoa.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
sick. It's like if Bruce Lee had been around to get shot in like a scene that was shot like a German expressionist kind of moment. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. It's really awesome.
It's the kind of expressionist like stuff you don't expect from a movie like this at all. It doesn't, like, going into this.
There's no reason for it. There's literally no plot reason for the scene to happen. It just happens because it looks sick.
That's why it feels like people going in with like something to prove. Like you don't do this unless what you're trying to do is prove that you can do something like this.
Yeah, they're not just trying to set up the simple fights or whatever, like, and just get the footage. It does feel like all of these set pieces have something kind of unique about them, and they're thought out. There's always these accented moments that are very memorable. Like we were talking about the red dot early on in the drug compound, and the kind of the back and forth that they do when they're fighting each other. And like there's a bunch of stuff in here that feels like it accents what could be a very simple action scene. So
yeah, well, and think about how many more set pieces are still even left after that moment, because like Griffith and Zhang both have their individual henchmen that they have to fight because they've kidnapped Frank and Danielle. So they each have a hostage. They each have a henchman. Like Van Damme was like, let's double everything. Let's stick with the title. We double it all. Everyone gets, both Van Dammes get to fight 2 different big bad guys. And so because it's Alex, I think, is the guy who fights the Spurs guy, and I think who has to fight does he also have to fight because Chad is the one who fights
you're not gonna
Bolo.
let Chad fight a woman.
No, Chad can't fight a woman. No. Chad gets to fight Bolo, who's back from Bloodsport. And once again,
I love the opening
just
of the
jacked
Bolo
beyond
fight.
belief.
Yeah, like Chad is shirtless, and so Bolo looks at him and just takes off his shirt and then flexes and
one of the
shows
best
that,
moments.
He looks like the Incredible fucking Hulk.
Yes.
Yeah. You got the biggest chest I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, it's insane.
He's also doing a maneuver that is insane to me, which is trying to kill him by hurling a flammable barrel at him just over and over again. Which I don't.
Donkey Kong.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen that before.
Definitely not.
He's throwing it at him, and then he'll pick it up and like crush him with it.
He's specialized in barrel throwing.
I mean, that's how you get that big, I think.
Yeah,
that has to be it. He's literally just showing off how strong he is at that point. He's just like, Van Damme, you do want to get out of the way of these barrels, man.
That barrel chest.
Well, I mean, it leads to that part where like Chad Van Damme, he leaps over and under that barrel, both like each, and he does a slow-mo jump kick at Bolo that then kicks him back into the electrical equipment and electrocutes him to death. But it's crazy that like just seeing like Bolo do something that they set up is like insanely strong, and just seeing Van Damme just casually like leap over him, like they're both in beast mode at this point.
Yes, absolutely.
And then of course Alex meanwhile is the one who's fighting the bodyguard Kara, who introduces herself, as Jamie mentioned, by dropping down from the ceiling and locking his head with her thighs. And like that's clearly the one reason that she was put into this movie. And also, by the way, because she can't stop herself, grabbing a handful of his cock.
Yeah. They have like a full on, it's like a good full 10 seconds of a struggle of whether or not he can get her to stop grabbing his dick. It's very funny, actually.
Which is after Chad makes the remark about how big his dick is. And also there's a part two where like a guard tries to assault Danielle for a second time. There's a weird amount of
with like a steam rod or something.
I don't know. Like it's a weird amount of like sexual assault that kind of takes like just casual in this finale, though it's not as tastelessly deployed as like Kickboxer, I guess.
At least it like doesn't actually happen. I think it gets stopped before it happens.
Yes.
But yeah.
I guess
crazy.
not the one with the muscular guard, the woman. What's her name in the movie? I can't remember. The one that plays the bodybuilder woman.
Kara.
Because when she kind of does like she kind of molests or like sexually assaults Danielle in that room or whatever. Yeah. But it does.
But she doesn't discriminate. She also sexually assaults Alex.
Yeah, she sexually assaults pretty much everybody that she comes in contact in this movie. And I will say too, like the one with the guard.
This is reminding me of Disclosure, Jamie. If you remember.
Oh yeah. It's like
what if a woman had power? A woman could also assault men in the office.
People. Yeah, I didn't know if you do that. Yeah, definitely.
Demi Moore and Michael Douglas taught me that one.
It does feel like they're kind of doing that with Kara, even aside from the sexual stuff. Like it does feel like when she's introduced, they're kind of like, look what we got. We got the female version of Jean-Claude Van Damme. And that's kind of how they present her a little bit, which is
she's got the biggest legs in the game.
Yeah.
But it's crazy. So like again, so there's a big fight with Bolo. There's a big fight with Kara, and this is all happening again in the innards of the ship. And you're like, okay, so at this point, we've definitely had like two different climaxes, and there's still more. Mm-hmm. You finally have, after they take out the big goons and they've each saved their hostage, the two twins each have to kill one of the two corrupt capitalists who killed their parents, of course.
Well, you'd think would just be like, oh, they'll crumble because they're the leaders. But no, each of them is willing to fight to the death.
Yeah, they have
and doing like crazy shit.
Yeah, they're like climbing cranes and like it's kind of wild actually what they're
the British
to
guy's
do.
version of fighting is he gets on top of he has the crane that like holds a giant shipping container. He's like, I'm gonna crush you with the shipping container. It's like in Total Recall where the guy's like driving the drill.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the fact that Griffith is like driving the forklift in order to crush Chad, and it's turned into this like very claustrophobically shot thing where he's literally going to push him off the edge, and then cut to Zhang whipping out a cane sword to fight Alex on top of a crane and getting his hand like crushed inside the gears and the machinery, and it's just
love a good it's cane sword, I gotta say.
It's pretty like in like it's big, like it's a much bigger finale than you would expect, and you do get the lovely moment where Griffith is talking to him about aren't you gonna go like help your brother or stop that guy? He's like, don't worry, or it's Alex says it. He's like, don't worry about Griffith, my brother is handling him. Like they're finally working together. They trust each other to kind of get the job done, and you get two sick villain, over the top villain dummy deaths.
Yeah,
you
two
get
of them.
Yeah, you get a sick dummy who's crushed under a shipping container, and you do see a split second of it just like his body being crushed by it as.
Yeah.
I love it. He empties his entire clip into the water.
Yeah.
Without a target, and then it turns out that the guy he was shooting at was actually not only behind him but on the controls of the crane.
Yeah.
I don't know how he gets there, but
I know.
I love that he does.
On the wiki, it just says that he sneaks around into the forklift, which I don't think
Sure.
they ever show it on screen. So it's very funny to watch him appear. Also, I love that he does his kind of. It's not as over the top as you'd see in like Bloodsport when he punches somebody or he's like getting pumped up or whatever. But he does a little bit of his Bruce Lee scream when he lets go of the container and pulls the lever. And I just think that that's very funny because he's not in a fight. He's just sitting in a crane, but he still has to like. Wah! And then like pulls
the
lever.
physical reaction.
He just has to hype
murder.
himself. Yeah, exactly. He's got to hype himself up, and I thought that detail was fantastic. Also,
and then
I'm a
Zhang
little
gets taken out.
claustrophobic, so that part, that just one shot where he throws Danielle into
He
the
throws
little
her in?
crevice,
Yeah.
and then it shuts on her. I was like, "Fuck that!" And it's only like 2 seconds, but I'm just claustrophobic, so that actually
I'd rather
terrifies
just
me.
dive into the water.
Yeah, for real.
And Alex is fighting Zhang up top, and Zhang is trying to like, dissuade him into, joining him again. And he's like, I'll give you half of everything. And he's like, what about my father?
Yeah.
And you get this sick dummy toss from hundreds of feet into the air. Zhang's body just crashes into this pile of wooden crates. And you would think he would like bounce off it or something, but no, he just rips right through it. That was a heavy dummy, whatever it was. And yeah, they eliminated the 2 people that killed their father. They hug it out because they gotta. The two Van Dams. You get to watch them hug it out on screen, and then Danielle goes over and hugs Alex, and you get one of the craziest endings to any Van Damme movie, which is just Chad giving him the okay sign and just being like, everything is a-okay. We just brutally murdered like 4 to 5 people
And it's so,
on screen.
It's so wild too because it does that like classic. I guess this is 90s technically, but it's almost that 80s freeze frame that they do.
They do the freeze frame, but they have the 90s hip hop credit song.
Yes,
That
so
plays
it's-
over the Blu-ray menu, by the way. So when you put in the Blu-ray, that plays while you're on the main menu, and a bunch of scenes in the movie go in the background.
Nice.
So
Incredible.
funny.
It's just amazing too that it's so upbeat. Like I understand, for them, it's like the problem is over, of course. But there's
a little
been
bit of
so much
catharsis there.
darkness, and it's hilarious that it ends still with an okay sign freeze frame into an upbeat song.
Big smile.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
I have a question about the end of this movie and the story, which maybe I should know, but I don't. So part of the motivation is the idea that the tunnel that their parents built is their like.
Oh yeah, they
birthright?
get money. Yeah, they get
So,
money
like,
from it or something.
Is that I don't think that's how civil engineering works, right? Like you don't get
No.
money because you build a tunnel; you just get paid up front for it.
Yeah.
It's a very confusing plot point.
It's not
this
like
idea
royalties
that,
to the tunnel. I don't think.
yeah, like I don't think Hong Kong and China pay you money because you built a tunnel. They pay you up front, and then that's it, right?
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
feel like.
as far as I know, there's no royalties
Yeah.
for it that they
Yeah.
seem to think that
Because
they are.
that's
that
the
they're
reason
going
the
to be
parents
getting.
get killed is for like the money that the tunnel's gonna generate, and by killing the people who stole the tunnel from their family, without having documents that prove that they owe the tunnel because their parents built it, that they're gonna inherit the tunnel.
No, the actual criminal conspiracy is kind of
I
just
wasn't even
like
paying attention to it a lot of the
they
time,
didn't
honestly.
think it through that much. They were just kind of like, here's a reason that 2 Van Dams both have to get revenge against double the amount of henchmen and bad guys.
It's like a step more convoluted than it needs to be to give motivation to
Yes,
the characters, but I
sure.
really love it. I love how convoluted it is as like an artifact of this team of creatives trying their hand at a more complicated story, and it shows as like an early effort in someone trying to write a more complex story than they've written before.
Yeah, Van Damme's not quite like a novelist or like a noir film writer. You can imagine. I don't think. But man, he was like, I'm gonna give it a go. I'm gonna give like 3-4 different kinds of movies a go. I'm gonna do some Hong Kong action. I'm gonna do some brotherly tragedy. You know, I'm gonna get it all.
Yeah, and it is cool to have to think about him kind of conceptualizing these action sequences himself, because I'm imagining him and Sheldon were really focused on like what would be the coolest thing. How can we bring it to life?
How can we write our way to set pieces?
Yeah. How can we make you look the best? Yeah. How do we get to a forklift death? Exactly.
What if Bolo picked up a barrel?
What can Bolo lift? What do we have on set? What do we got?
What if a woman had massive thighs? You know, you could just you could just hear Van Damme like giggling, just imagining these things.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
dude. What if I got to do like the Bond tuxedo? You know, like I got.
What if I cut to myself?
Yeah. What if I was in a John Woo movie for like 5 minutes? You know, literally, he was like, "Here's like an audition for 10 different types of action film."
Yeah, for real. It does feel like a lot of
this is his
ideas
reel
we've
that he's
seen
like showing
in a sense.
Yes,
but as a movie.
Yeah, it's a bunch of things just kind of put together. Stuff that you may have seen in the 80s and 90s, but it's got that, it's got the Van Damme charm, and it's fun to watch him do both things because you just so rarely get to do that.
It's got the feeling of like a someone's dream project. Like you go to like someone who's in film school and is writing their first script, and it's like got all of their ideas that they've ever had all in one, because they've got to get them all out of their head at once. Like that's that has the energy of someone who's fresh faced and looking to get like they haven't gotten enough of their ideas out into the world yet that they're like more focused.
And they're like, it's almost, with this it works and it's good, but it's almost too eager. Like they're just like, I gotta show you, I have to show you. It may not be completely finished yet, but I just have to show the world.
Kind of like a childlike glee to it, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Here's a production fact. Did you guys read about like who was almost the other brother in this?
No.
Because
before he decided that he could only cut himself.
On it.
So JCVD was pitching it as he wanted to play both roles. That was why he was interested in the project. He saw it as a chance to flex his acting skills. But his agent also represented Dolph. And his agent was pitching the studio on JCVD and Dolph because if he got both of them signed to the same movie, he would get paid twice for the signing bonuses.
Well, that would be the real double impact of the whole thing. Is if that guy was thinking money mindset all the way.
He was pulling his own little Griffith move in the back, but he lost.
Yeah, as much as I mean, I really
which
like
to
that
be
we
fair,
got to see.
it would literally happen the next year with Universal Soldier.
Yes,
true.
Like we didn't lose out on them teaming up.
Yeah,
no.
It would have been interesting to see these like two brothers though, because I don't know how tall Van Damme is, but he seems like just on the shorter side of martial artist. And with Dolph, he's like what, 6'4" or some shit like that. Like
Van Damme's like average height. He's like 5'10" or something.
Yeah, so it would have been kind of cool to see like a lean fighter brother versus the big power brother. But I mean, we kind of like we said, we get that a little bit in Universal Soldier, so we got it eventually. And I do like watching two Van Dammes here.
Yeah. But I think if we're pivoting towards reductive rating round here on Double Impact, this one also is going to get it's going to hang out at like the solid to high 3 territory for me a little bit, just as a first time watch. But I am impressed with where Van Damme and Lettich kind of went. Like I do think that with Lionheart, they were a little bit more effective at the actual dramatics that they were trying to pull off. And I think that that's a good reel for showing what Van Damme can do in that department. But this is a better reel in the department of the diversity of action styles that Van Damme could do and the range of, types of characters that he could play. And just the fact that, again, he's writing a movie for himself and he's just like, well, this is sort of like my Dead Ringers and my Alexander Dumas film, but it includes insane things like Bolo trying to kill him by throwing flammable barrels at him, and having that huge expressionist fight with just cowboy spurs, and having the insane cucking fantasy stuff. Like, it's just, Jean-Claude definitely relishes the opportunity he gets to play two very different sides of himself, and also to style himself differently. I do love that, Alex is the cigar chomping leather clad, cool guy and bad boy who says naughty words and, like that aspect to him where, Chad is, much more clean cut and much brighter. And the fact that we're introduced to him in almost a cartoonishly meta degree of Jean-Claude, in his yeah, in his ballet tights and, just all that kind of stuff. It's wonderful. And yeah, again, though I think some people, try to argue that it's a little strange to have two Van Dammes and have so little like martial arts in comparison to some of the previous movies that he's done.
Sure.
I will say Lettich, he's pretty good with the shootouts, man. I think the action here is stronger than it is in Lionheart. I think the Hong Kong audition stuff that they're doing looks nicer. I even think like the chase stuff and the boat hopping is really nice, and the slow-mo and the squibs, and how, the gruesome chase into executions of the opening versus, all of the various final confrontations at the end. Like, I thought this was a big step up for Lettich in terms of action. And I imagine it in part from working with such a veteran cinematographer who did some of the most stylish film. Like the dude shot Body Heat. We covered that not that long ago on the show. It's like a beautiful movie, and just drenching this thing in all of the lights and colors and slow-mo. It might not make complete sense with the story that they're telling, but it looks great. It leads to some, as Brandon put it, like just how many different situations can we gleefully write ourselves into that Van Damme would look cool in and have a fun time doing. And, some of that, even if it doesn't make sense, some of that I think bleeds into you as an audience member. It's definitely fun to watch.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's a solid 3, maybe even a strong 3. I think really what would have elevated it is the including a little bit more martial arts to mix in with all the gun stuff. But like you said, the gun stuff is actually quite good, and I was surprised at that. There's a lot of impact, a lot of squibs. There's environments just being torn apart by bullets. Like
20 straight slow-mo seconds of him just shooting a gun.
Yeah.
And you just being like, wow.
God, he looks good doing that. Yeah, exactly. It is a lot of fun, and it's so fun to watch them kind of interact and him play kind of both, like the full side, one side of each spectrum of what he's known to do. I guess more specifically with Chad's the nice one or whatever, right? Yeah. So like more specifically, he's playing it with Chad and kind of diving into something he wanted to do, I think, with Alex. But it is really interesting to watch them interact, and the meta stuff is fantastic. Like the first part where it kind of establishes like the big butt shot that now he's become like kind of famous for. But then you have him
his butt is
playing
huge
with his,
too. Like it is kind of unreal.
And then you kind of have him playing with his ego a little bit by having him cuck himself, and I think that is fantastic. So there's a lot of really cool elements, and once again, I think Lettich and Van Damme just kind of understand each other and what they want out of their projects. So there's something very cohesive about everything, even if the plotting itself is kind of strange and maybe doesn't make total sense here and there. You don't really care because it's not what you're here for.
And they're still kind of very messily making the transition from like Van Damme before could get B-movie budgets, but now they're starting to get bigger budgets, but they're made by guys who, like, Lettich had previously not directed a movie before, and Van Damme hadn't quite led a movie of these types before. Like, you can just feel two guys kind of out of their comfort zone, but like maybe not the best at it, but putting the work in and clearly experimenting in a fun way. So
yeah, totally. So I thought that this was a lot of fun. This is my second time watching it, so I had seen it before, but with a lot of Van Damme's, I went through like it was a few weeks of just watching whatever was on streaming for Van Damme, and eventually a little bit of it got kind of mushed together, and my brain was like, which one was that and which one wasn't? So it was nice to revisit this, and I
yes,
really
we had a lot of
enjoy
commenters reach out to say Jamie was not describing the plot of Lionheart last week. He was describing the plot of Nowhere to Run.
Right. Yeah. Which is also when he comes in and saves like a family. So that was my confusion. Yes. But yeah, so solid 3, maybe even a strong 3. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, for you, Brandon.
And for me, it's another 4. These are both 4s for me. These are, I think,
hell yeah.
Like Double Impact, I think, is my favorite of the two, although they're pretty close. They're both in my top 10 Van Damme picture. I love what this is reaching for. I love the energy of seeing these two artists, Sheldon Lettich and Jean-Claude Van Damme, coming up together and trying to prove themselves in a variety of different ways. This has like such a great energy to it. I love it as a, if Lionheart is the Jean-Claude Van Damme, like dipping his toes into dramatic acting, this is him dipping his toes into villain acting, which he won't do very much until later in his career. If audience haven't seen Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning, he really leads into it there. That's an incredible movie.
Yes, it is.
Watch that. Just fucking awesome.
It's the best.
He also plays like a
Doesn't
villain
stop.
in Enemies Closer 2013. It's a Die Hard ripoff. He plays the Hans Gruber type role.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to see like his first dipping his toes into what he thinks of villain role of his what he can do as a villain. Which now that Alex isn't exactly a villain, but he's like a bad guy. Like what is
Yeah.
Jean-Claude's idea of a bad guy? And it turns out it's like turning up the edgeometer to the top, like he's writing Shadow the Hedgehog, but a human.
Yeah.
But like that's just really interesting. I love seeing him reach that far. It's a type of character he wouldn't play again in the 90s. Like he wouldn't touch more bad boys until like the late 2000s. So it's like it's like an interesting part of the history. If you're gonna watch every Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, like I did, it's a really interesting bit in the middle, early part of his career. I think the shootouts are incredible. I think like we're just really great. Like it's really fun to see that little taste of what you would get more of in a better movie, Hard Target.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a lot of fun. I love it. It's my third time watching it. I love it every time I watch it. I think it's my third time in 3 years watching it. Actually, I think I watch it once a year at this point.
Nice.
Goddamn.
No, it's just, I love it a lot. I love seeing these two different versions of him. Jeffrey Lewis is great, and I think again that idea that Sheldon Lettich has, which is you put a veteran actor next to Jean-Claude Van Damme, it makes him a better actor himself. Just shines through in both of these pictures.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just two young artists really reaching for the stars, and that's exciting to see. I dig it.
Hell yeah. And I think that is going to wrap it up for this week. That was, I don't know why I'm already blanking on this, Lionheart and Double Impact. Thanks so much, Brandon, for joining us and lending us your enthusiasm about Jean-Claude Van Damme. But this is usually the part of the show where if you've got anything to plug while you're here, we usually have you do that. What's going on in Dadcore world?
Yeah, so you can follow me personally on Twitter at ThatOneGuy64, everyone. In terms of Dadcore Cinema Club, we just actually, the day we're recording this, put out our latest episode on The Long Good Friday with Bob Hoskins.
Great
Helen
film.
Mirren, young Pierce Brosnan, his first screen performance. He's shirtless. He's like a gay honeypot IRA agent. Fantastic. Our next episode. When does this go up? Is this
this is going to go up this weekend.
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple days after this airs, we'll have our next episode up. Beginning of next week, we're doing Enter the Dragon, which I'm very excited about. So we're going to stick with a little bit of a martial arts theme. So come check us out, Dadcore Cinema Club at Dadcore Cinema on Twitter. DadcoreCinema.club is the URL you can use to look at the Anchor FM page. That's what I got.
Can definitely recommend doing that. For our listeners, we are going to be back continuing January. And don't worry, we are not going to be technically skipping Universal Soldier, Hard Target, or Street Fighter because we've already done those episodes. Go back if you're like, hey, the next episodes they're about to announce aren't on any of those films. That's because they've already been covered. We have full episodes on all of them, and most of them are great except for Street Fighter. We did Street Fighter really early on, though. That might have been the first Van Damme that we did, and it was probably why it took us so long to come back around to him. And then we loved Universal Soldier and Hard Target. We had a blast with with both of those. But because we've already covered all of those, next chronologically, we are going to be doing an episode on Peter Hyams and Jean-Claude Van Damme's collaborations. We're going to be talking about Time Cop, which is exactly what it sounds like. Jean-Claude Van Damme literally policing time and people trying to break it in order to commit crimes. And we're going to be pairing that with Sudden Death from 1995, which is just one of my personal favorite Van Damme films, especially the sort of like dramatic side that he gets to do. And it is quite literally, as everyone will tell you, it is just Die Hard. But instead of terrorists taking over a corporate office building, they are hijacking the Stanley Cup playoffs of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And obviously, as a result, Jean-Claude also gets to play a Canadian. And also, you have in the Alan Rickman role, you've got Powers Booth. And, you know, how are you going to go wrong with that? He's just the best.
It's a great movie. I'm excited for that episode.
Yeah, no, we're going to have a blast. Because I think that's one of the only ones Jamie hasn't seen that we're talking about this month, right? Because there was only a couple that you hadn't seen, and that was one. And then in 2 weeks' time, so that's going to be over on the Patreon feed exclusively. And then in 2 weeks' time, we are going to be back with a special guest, and we are going to be returning to the realm of Jean-Claude works with Hong Kong auteurs. We're going to be talking about Maximum Risk from 1996, directed by Ringo Lam, and we're going to be pairing it with Knockoff 1998, directed by Choi Hark, because we've already covered Double Team. As well, which was his other collaboration with Choi Hark. So, and with Maximum Risk and Knockoff, as I've been saving these ones, so I haven't seen them. I haven't seen either of them, and I'm stoked because I love Ringo Lam's City on Fire, and I've heard Full Contact is amazing. So I'm excited for Maximum Risk, and then with Choi Hark. This is the one I've been saving for a long time because I think it is one of the bigger Choi Harks I haven't seen yet, because I've seen more of, I've seen Once Upon a Time in China. We've covered Green Snake on the show. But the idea of Jean-Claude as a sales representative for like a knockoff jeans company who gets involved in some sort of CIA conspiracy, it sounds like the best movie ever made, in my opinion. So
yeah, when I watched
wait.
it, I gave it that like strong 3, but I remember thinking I really need to rewatch this because I think there might be something more to it. So I'm stoked to revisit it. It's got a lot of awesome style in its action. I do remember that. So.
Hell yeah. Well, that's what you can expect over for the rest of January. But until then, keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.